I opened my home to my sister when she had nowhere else to go, even while I was 6 months pregnant with my first child. During one vicious argument, she kicked my swollen stomach and left me gasping in agonizing pain on the hardwood floor. Then the heavy front door swung open and my federal judge husband walked in and saw exactly what she had done. But before I tell you how my sister's entitlement collided with the crushing weight of the federal justice system, please take a moment to like and subscribe if you believe toxic family members need to face the consequences of their actions. Let me know in the comments what city or state you are watching from and what time it is there right now. I always love reading where you are tuning in from. Now let me take you back to the night the invasion of my peaceful life began. My name is Sarah. I am 32 years old. I work as the parish administrator and head bookkeeper at a massive bustling community church in a wealthy suburb of Ohio. My days are spent balancing complex ledgers, organizing massive community charity drives, coordinating with demanding church elders, and maintaining absolute unwavering order in a world that can often feel completely chaotic. I love the quiet, reliable predictability of numbers and spreadsheets. Numbers never lie to you. Numbers never manipulate your emotions or gaslight you into doubting your own memory. They simply tell you the objective truth provided you are willing to look closely enough and do the hard work. My husband David is 42 years old. He is a brilliant, deeply observant, intensely calm man with a quiet physical presence that naturally commands respect in any room he enters. 6 months ago, his decades of relentless hard work and legal brilliance culminated in his lifetime appointment as a federal district court judge. We had just recently moved into a beautiful, sprawling new home in a quiet, heavily manicured, highly secure neighborhood. We were joyfully spending our evenings painting walls and assembling furniture, preparing the perfect nursery for our soon-to-be-born baby girl. After years of hard work, saving, and careful planning, my life was finally perfect, peaceful, and entirely secure. Then came the heavy, frantic knock on our heavy oak front door on a freezing, torrential Tuesday evening. I was standing in our warm kitchen brewing a cup of decaf chamomile tea, relishing the soothing, rhythmic sound of rain violently tapping against the large bay windows. David was locked away in his private home office down the hall, deeply engrossed in reviewing heavily redacted federal case files. When the doorbell suddenly chimed, echoing through the quiet house, my heart gave a strange, uncomfortable flutter. We were absolutely not expecting any guests, especially not in this kind of severe weather. I pulled my thick woolen cardigan tight across my prominent pregnant belly and walked cautiously to the grand foyer. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled open the door to find my younger sister Chloe standing alone on our covered porch. She was 28 years old, a grown adult by any standard metric, but she still knew exactly how to physically shrink herself to look like a lost, helpless, abandoned little girl. She was shivering violently, her teeth audibly chattering while awkwardly clutching 2 oversized waterlogged duffel bags. Her expensive salon-styled blonde hair was plastered flat against her face, and her dark designer mascara was running down her pale cheeks in thick dramatic streaks. Chloe had always been the undisputed golden child of our family. The rules that applied to me simply never applied to her. While I worked exhausting double shifts to put myself through a local state college, and eagerly took on practical, unglamorous office jobs to build a stable financial foundation, Chloe was chronically, unapologetically unemployed. She was endlessly chasing unrealistic, glamorous dreams of being a social media influencer, a high-fashion buyer, or a luxury lifestyle coach, jumping impulsively from one expensive failed venture to the next. And every single time she failed, she was instantly and unconditionally bailed out by our enabling parents. She looked up at me with wide, pitiful, tear-filled eyes. She immediately began to sob a loud theatrical wail and told me she had been completely and unfairly evicted from her downtown apartment. She claimed between dramatic gasps for air that her roommates had maliciously turned against her out of pure, unadulterated jealousy, completely without warning and without any justification. It was the exact same tired story she always told whenever she ruined a relationship or destroyed a living situation. In Chloe's highly curated version of reality, nothing was ever the result of her own actions. The world was simply a cruel, unfair place that loved to punish her, and she was always the tragic, innocent victim of circumstance. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, but the rain was blowing onto the porch. I stepped back and invited her into the warm foyer to dry off my mind racing with immediate anxiety. Before I could even walk to the hall closet to hand her a warm, dry towel, my cell phone started ringing loudly from the kitchen counter. The caller ID flashed brightly. I knew exactly who it was before I even picked it up. It was our father, Pastor John, calling with our mother Linda undoubtedly listening closely on speakerphone. I took a deep breath, braced myself for the incoming emotional assault, and answered the call. They did not bother to ask if I was doing well. They did not ask how my high-risk pregnancy was progressing or if the baby was healthy. They immediately launched into a highly coordinated, perfectly rehearsed, emotionally devastating guilt trip. My father used his booming, authoritative pulpit voice laced with thick, heavy theatrical disappointment. He told me that Chloe was a lost sheep with nowhere else to turn in this dark world. He aggressively declared that it was my fundamental, non-negotiable Christian duty to open my doors and take my vulnerable younger sister in. He spoke endlessly about the virtues of charity, unconditional forgiveness, and absolute family loyalty, deliberately using his powerful authority as a respected community pastor to corner me emotionally. My mother chimed in right after him, not missing a single beat. Her voice was sharp, fast, and demanding. She immediately brought up our finances. She loudly reminded me that David makes a substantial guaranteed federal salary, now completely ignoring the years of crushing law school debt we had just paid off. She pointed out that we have a massive, beautiful new house with plenty of perfectly good empty guest rooms just sitting there collecting dust. She told me I was being incredibly selfish, cold-hearted, and unchristian for even hesitating for a single second while my own flesh and blood sister stood shivering and homeless in my hallway. They expertly weaponized my lifelong faith, my husband's hard-earned professional success, and my deep, pathetic, lifelong desire to simply be accepted and loved by them. I stood frozen in my own kitchen, gripping the edge of the marble countertop, feeling the familiar, suffocating, crushing weight of my parents' demands pressing down heavily on my chest. I felt a sudden spike of anxiety radiating through my stomach. I looked up and saw David quietly standing in the doorway of his study. David possesses the sharp, unforgiving, highly trained lie detecting skills of a seasoned federal judge. He reads body language and micro-expressions for a living. He had heard the commotion and saw right through Chloe's dramatic, performative tears the second he looked into the foyer. I could see the quiet, solid, protective reservation burning in his dark eyes. He knew logically and legally that bringing her into our home was a terrible, dangerous idea. He knew the kind of absolute toxic chaos my family always dragged into my life. But he also saw my physical distress. He saw my hands shaking violently as I held the phone to my ear. He saw the genuine panic in my eyes as I tried to fend off my aggressive parents. He stepped forward, calmly closed the distance between us, placed a warm, incredibly gentle hand on my tense shoulder, and nodded exactly once. He did not say a single word out loud, but his silent message was beautifully, heartbreakingly clear. He was yielding his own boundaries not to appease my manipulative parents, but entirely to me. He was giving in to protect my mental peace, to lower my dangerously spiking blood pressure, and to protect our unborn child from the toxic stress radiating through the room. I took a deep, shaky breath, actively sacrificed my safe sanctuary, and told my parents over the phone that Chloe could stay. I hung up, walked back into the grand foyer, and told my sister she could use the upstairs guest room for a few short weeks until she got her finances back on her feet. Chloe instantly threw her wet, heavy arms around my neck, sobbing her dramatic thanks, swearing up and down that she would be the most perfect, invisible, helpful houseguest in the world. I desperately wanted to believe her. I truly, foolishly did. But the exact moment Chloe dragged her heavy, scuffed duffel bags up my newly carpeted stairs, the entire dynamic of our peaceful home shifted violently. I thought I was offering a temporary, loving lifeline to a struggling sibling, but Chloe immediately treated our home like a fully staffed, luxury, all-inclusive resort. The invasion was remarkably subtle during the first 12 hours, but it escalated with terrifying speed. By the very next morning, she was openly and loudly complaining about the generic brand of decaf coffee I had brewed, demanding to know if David could leave $100 in cash on the counter for her to go to a premium artisanal cafe downtown. She left her soaking wet, balled-up bath towels directly on the pristine, newly finished hardwood floors of the upstairs guest bathroom. She blasted mindless reality television shows in the main living room at maximum volume, while I was sitting quietly at the kitchen island, desperately trying to review complex, multi-tiered church payroll spreadsheets. When I gently and politely asked her to lower the volume so I could concentrate on the numbers, she sighed loudly, rolled her eyes dramatically, and muttered hurtful comments under her breath about how rigid, boring, and obsessively controlling I had become since getting married. But the real underlying conflict was not about wet towels ruining hardwood floors or loud television shows interrupting my work. It was about something much deeper and far more insidious. It was about fundamental boundaries. My house was my absolute safe haven, the one place in the entire world where I had total control, safety, and peace. Chloe was systematically, deliberately testing every single lock, pushing aggressively against every established boundary to see exactly what she could get away with before I finally snapped. The true terrifying breaking point happened on night 2. I woke up abruptly at exactly 2 a.m. My pregnant body was aching terribly. My lower back was throbbing, and I desperately needed to use the bathroom. The large house was completely heavy silent except for the rhythmic, comforting, steady sound of rain continuing to drum against the roof tiles outside. I slipped slowly out of our warm bed, extremely careful not to wake David, who was sleeping deeply and soundly beside me after a grueling 14-hour day in federal court. As I walked quietly down the dark carpeted second-floor hallway, I noticed something incredibly strange and entirely out of place. There was a thin, sharp sliver of warm yellow light spilling out from underneath the closed wooden door of the baby's nursery. I stopped dead in my tracks. My heart immediately did a strange, uncomfortable, rapid flutter against my ribs. Chloe's assigned guest room was located at the complete opposite end of the long hallway. David was fast asleep in our master bedroom behind me. There was absolutely no logical, innocent reason for anyone to be awake and moving around inside the unfinished nursery at 2 a.m. I pressed my hand protectively against my tight, pregnant stomach. I took a slow, quiet, deep breath to steady my rapidly fraying nerves, reached out silently, turned the brass doorknob, and pushed the nursery door wide open. The room was bathed in the soft, gentle casting glow of a small plug and nightlight. Chloe was standing right beside the expensive wooden changing table we had just assembled. She was not lovingly admiring the carefully folded baby clothes stacked in the open drawers. She was not admiring the newly painted soft pink walls or the delicate crib mobile. She had her back completely turned to me, and she was frantically, aggressively rummaging her hands through a small decorative floral storage box where I kept highly important odds and ends during the chaotic moving process. I stepped fully into the room, squared my shoulders, and cleared my throat loudly. Chloe jumped violently, letting out a sharp, genuine gasp of surprise. She spun around rapidly to face me, her eyes wide, panicked, and darting wildly around the room like a trapped, guilty animal looking for an escape route. But my eyes did not look at her shocked face. My highly trained eyes immediately locked dead onto what she was holding tightly in her hands. In her left hand, her fingers were wrapped tightly around my spare set of heavy brass house keys. In her right hand, she was clutching a fresh blank checkbook from my private personal bank account, the specific high-balance account I used exclusively to pay independent electrical and plumbing contractors for the ongoing nursery renovations. The blood drained completely from my face, leaving me cold and numb. The meticulous, detail-oriented, hyper-vigilant bookkeeper inside me sounded every single blaring alarm bell at once. My sister was not just innocently snooping through my personal things out of bored curiosity. She was actively hunting. She was deliberately looking for unrestricted physical access to my home. She was actively looking for a way to drain my money. I stood my ground, my pregnant belly firm, and demanded in a low, dangerous whisper to know exactly what she was doing, digging through my private financial belongings in my unborn child's room in the middle of the night. Without missing a single solitary beat, Chloe's genuinely terrified expression completely melted away. It was replaced instantly, almost magically, by a flawless, practiced mask of wounded, fragile, heartbreaking innocence. Her eyes filled rapidly with giant, glistening tears. She hastily dropped the house keys and the blank checkbook back into the decorative box, stepping away from the changing table, and dramatically clutched both of her hands tightly over her chest. She looked at me with a perfectly trembling bottom lip and told me she was having a severe, debilitating panic attack. She claimed she was suffering from horrific night terrors about being homeless and abandoned to die on the cold streets. She said she wandered into the nursery because the baby's room felt soothing and safe, and she was simply innocently looking for a blank piece of scrap paper and a pen to write down her anxious thoughts to calm her racing, traumatized mind. Then, with the terrifying practiced skill of a lifelong expert manipulator, she turned the entire attack completely around on me. She began to hyperventilate on command, sobbing loudly and aggressively, her shoulders heaving. She viciously accused me of creeping up on her in the dark like a predator and deliberately trying to scare her while she was in a highly vulnerable, fragile mental state. She asked me, her voice dripping with venomous betrayal, how I could possibly be so cruel, so paranoid, and so deeply suspicious of my own flesh and blood sister who was just trying to survive. She played the ultimate persecuted victim so perfectly, so effortlessly, that for a split second the sheer overwhelming emotional force of her performance almost made me doubt my own sanity and my own reality. But I am a professional bookkeeper. I track every single penny, every physical receipt, and every mathematical discrepancy. I do not deal in emotional illusions or manipulative theater. I deal strictly in cold, hard facts. And the undeniable fact was, I knew exactly what I had clearly seen clutched in her greedy hands. She was not looking for a piece of paper to write a therapeutic diary entry. My sister was actively looking for a way to steal my hard-earned money, my security, and my life. I stared silently at her as she continued to sob fake theatrical tears into her hands. I realized in that chilling, silent moment that my parents had not sent me a helpless, struggling refugee who just needed a little love. They had sent a dangerous, calculating parasite into my home, and the true invasion had only just begun. The first few days of my sister living under our roof felt like a slow, suffocating fog rolling into my previously perfect life. I had foolishly hoped that providing a warm bed and free food would give Chloe the stability she needed to finally look for a job and get back on her feet. Instead, she treated our newly built home like a permanent vacation resort where the staff was entirely invisible, and she was the most important guest. She slept until noon every single day. She left her soaking wet bath towels crumpled on our pristine hardwood floors, completely ignoring my polite request to hang them up. She ordered piles of expensive clothes online, using money our parents had secretly wired her, leaving the torn cardboard delivery boxes scattered recklessly across my clean kitchen island. But her physical mess was absolutely nothing compared to the toxic psychological campaign she was quietly launching against my marriage. I just did not see it coming until she brought her poison directly into my sanctuary. My workplace, the massive community church where I served as the parish administrator and head bookkeeper, was my ultimate safe harbor. I managed the complex charity drives. I balanced the intricate payroll ledgers. The congregation respected me deeply for my steady reliability. But on the second Sunday of Chloe staying with us, the atmosphere in the fellowship hall felt incredibly strange and heavy. I was sitting at my usual table organizing the weekly donation envelopes when a senior church elder, an older woman named Martha, who had known me since I was a teenager, walked slowly up to my table. Her eyes were swimming with a thick, suffocating layer of pity. She reached out and patted my hand with a deeply patronizing sigh that made my skin crawl. She told me the entire women prayer circle was holding me in their hearts during this dark season. She said they understood how difficult it must be for me to be married to a man who monitored my every penny and kept me trapped. She leaned in close and whispered that financial abuse was a silent epidemic, and she reminded me that the church had discreet emergency funds if I ever needed to buy groceries for my unborn baby without David knowing. I stood there completely paralyzed, staring at Martha in absolute bewilderment. I am the head bookkeeper. I literally manage every single financial account for my own household and for the entire church community. David has never once questioned a single purchase I have ever made in our entire relationship. I asked Martha what on earth she was talking about, my voice trembling with suppressed shock. Martha looked around nervously and pointed toward the coffee station across the large room. There stood my sister Chloe. She was holding a paper cup of decaf coffee, surrounded by 4 of the most influential gossipy women in our congregation. Chloe was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, playing the tragic, selfless heroine perfectly. I walked over quietly, slipping behind a large stone pillar to listen to the conversation. Chloe was weaving a masterful, devastating lie. She was telling these sweet, gullible older women that she only moved into our guest room to protect me from my own life. She claimed that David, my intensely calm and deeply loving husband, was a terrifying tyrant behind closed doors. She told them David controlled all my bank accounts, refused to let me buy comfortable maternity clothes for my high-risk pregnancy, and forced me to work long, exhausting hours just to earn my keep in his house. She painted my husband, a newly appointed federal judge, as a controlling monster. She painted me as a helpless, trapped victim. And she painted herself as the brave savior stepping in to shield me from his wrath. The sheer audacity of her lies made the blood pound violently in my ears. She was not just trying to get sympathy from older women. She was deliberately trying to destroy my husband's immaculate reputation in the very community where we had built our lives. She knew David's career relied on absolute moral integrity. If rumors of domestic financial abuse reached the wrong people at the courthouse, it could cause catastrophic damage to his federal appointment. I wanted to march over there and scream at her. I wanted to expose her lies right then and there. But I remembered what David always told me. We do not just get mad. We build an airtight case. So I took a deep breath, smoothed down my maternity dress, and walked away in silence. I would not give her the satisfaction of a public emotional breakdown. Her sabotage at the church was just the beginning of her escalation. Since she could not break me down emotionally, she decided to bypass me entirely and go straight for the man she had just falsely accused of being a financial tyrant. She thought she could manipulate David just as easily as she manipulated our enabling parents and the naive church ladies. She fundamentally misunderstood who she was dealing with. It happened on a rainy Wednesday evening during her 3rd week in our home. I was in the kitchen preparing a quiet dinner. David was locked in his private study at the end of the hall, deeply focused on reading complex legal briefs. The heavy oak door to his office was usually closed tight when he worked, but tonight it was cracked open just a few inches. As I walked down the carpeted hall to tell him dinner was almost ready, I heard the unmistakable sound of my sister crying. It was not a genuine cry of pain, but the soft, rhythmic, perfectly calculated whimpering she always used when she wanted our father to buy her something expensive. I stopped dead in my tracks and pressed my back against the wall outside the study. I peeked carefully through the narrow gap in the doorway. Chloe was sitting in the leather guest chair across from David's massive mahogany desk. She was wearing one of my expensive cashmere cardigans pulled tightly around her shoulders to make her look small and fragile. Tears were streaming beautifully down her face. She was telling David a long, convoluted story about a massive credit card debt she had incurred because of a terrible roommate. She claimed collection agencies were threatening to garnish her non-existent wages and ruin her entire life before it even started. Then came the ultimate manipulation. She leaned forward, placing her hands softly on his desk, and looked up at him with wide, innocent, tear-filled eyes. She asked him for a private cash loan of $5,000. But the worst part was how she framed her request. She begged him not to tell me about the money. She told David that I was too hormonal, too strict, and too financially rigid to understand her struggles. She actually tried to create a secret toxic bond with my husband by throwing me completely under the bus. She whispered that David was the only successful, reasonable person in our entire family, and that only he could save her from disaster. I held my breath, waiting in the hallway to see how my husband would react. David did not move a single muscle. He sat perfectly still in his high-backed leather chair, his hands steepled together beneath his chin. His face was a mask of absolute terrifying calm. He possessed the razor-sharp lie-detecting skills of a seasoned federal judge. He spent his entire professional life listening to expert criminals lie on the witness stand under oath. My sister's amateur theatrics were completely transparent to him. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, smooth, and colder than freezing rain. He told her that he was incredibly disturbed by her request. He systematically dismantled her entire performance in less than 2 minutes. He stated, speaking to her as if she were a hostile witness in a federal courtroom, that she was asking him to deceive his pregnant wife, hide $5,000 in marital assets, and hand over a large sum of unsecured cash to someone with zero income and a documented history of severe financial irresponsibility. He told her that her attempt to manipulate him by insulting my character was not only pathetic but entirely unacceptable in his home. He leaned forward slightly, his dark eyes locking onto hers with a heavy, crushing authority. He told her there would be absolutely no loan. He told her there would be no secrets kept from his wife, and he warned her in a tone that made the hairs on my arms stand straight up that if she ever attempted to undermine our marriage again, her stay in our guest room would be terminated immediately. The transformation in my sister was instant and horrifying. The fragile weeping victim vanished entirely into thin air. The fake tears dried up in a second. Her spine snapped straight. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, ugly, unfiltered resentment. Her eyes narrowed into dark slits of absolute hatred. She glared at David with a venom so toxic it took my breath away. She realized in that exact moment that her usual manipulative tricks would never work on him. He saw right through to the rotten, entitled core of her soul, and she hated him deeply for it. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the wood floor, and stormed out of the study. I barely managed to slip into the adjacent laundry room before she barged down the hallway, her fists clenched tight at her sides, muttering angry curses under her breath. The atmosphere in the house after that rejected loan request became thick and suffocating. Chloe stopped pretending to be the polite, grateful houseguest. She stopped speaking to David, entirely glaring at him across the kitchen island whenever he entered the room. She treated me with a dismissive, arrogant silence, acting as if we were the cruel villains who had deeply wronged her. She spent hours locked in her guest room, pacing back and forth, talking in hushed, angry tones on her cell phone to our enabling parents. I could feel the tension building inside our home like a pressure cooker waiting to explode. I just kept my head down, focusing on my high-risk pregnancy and my demanding work, desperately counting down the days until she finally packed her bags and left. But dangerous parasites do not leave voluntarily. When they cannot manipulate you into handing over what they want, they simply bypass your consent and take it by brute force. The devastating truth finally came to light on a quiet Friday afternoon. The house was blissfully empty. Chloe had taken my spare car without asking my permission to go meet a friend downtown. David was at the federal courthouse presiding over a long, complicated trial. I had taken the afternoon off from the church office to catch up on household chores and manage our personal finances. This was my favorite weekly ritual. As a professional bookkeeper, I find immense peace in organizing numbers and ledgers. I love sitting at the large dining room table with a fresh cup of decaf chamomile tea, sorting through the weekly mail, balancing our checking accounts, and ensuring every single financial detail of our lives is perfectly managed, transparent, and secure. I brought the large stack of mail in from the front porch mailbox. I sat down at the heavy oak table and began my usual methodical sorting process. Junk mail went directly into the recycling bin. Utility bills went into the urgent payment pile. Charity solicitations went into a separate stack for David to review later. My hands moved with practiced rhythmic efficiency. Then I stopped. My fingers froze completely on a thick, crisp, white envelope hidden near the bottom of the stack. The professional logo printed in the top left corner belonged to a major national credit card bank. A bank I did not use. A bank David did not use. But what made my heart suddenly stop beating was the name printed clearly in the center of the transparent plastic window. It was not addressed to my married name. It was addressed to my maiden name. The name I had not used legally in over 4 years since the joyful day I married David. A cold, heavy dread began to pool deep in the bottom of my stomach, spreading icy fingers through my veins. My professional instincts, honed by years of catching payroll discrepancies and financial fraud at the church, immediately kicked into high gear. There is absolutely no innocent logical reason for a major credit card company to send a thick first-class statement envelope to a married woman using her outdated maiden name at her current newly purchased residential address. My hands started to shake uncontrollably. I set my warm cup of tea down hard on the table before I could spill it over the documents. I grabbed my stainless steel letter opener and sliced aggressively through the top edge of the thick envelope. I pulled out the crisp, folded pages, smoothing them flat against the table with trembling fingers. I stared down at the bold black numbers printed on the glossy paper, and I felt all the oxygen leave my lungs in one violent, agonizing rush. It was a platinum-tier credit card statement. The account had been opened exactly 14 days ago, precisely 3 days after Chloe had moved her heavy duffel bags into our guest room. The credit limit was shockingly high, clearly approved instantly, based on my excellent lifelong credit score that I had spent a decade building. But the current balance due was what made the entire room spin dizzily around me. There was an outstanding balance of nearly $15,000. I gripped the hard edge of the dining room table, my knuckles turning completely white from the force. My eyes darted frantically down the long, itemized list of recent transactions printed across 3 pages. I saw thousands of dollars casually charged at luxury designer boutiques downtown. I saw massive cash advances withdrawn from various automated teller machines located in neighboring states. I saw outrageous charges for expensive salon treatments, high-end restaurants, and online designer shoe stores. Every single purchase was a blatant, unapologetic, premeditated theft. My sister had not just innocently snooped through my spare keys and my nursery boxes that night in the dark. She had used that opportunity to steal my social security number, my date of birth, and my deeply buried maiden name from my old tax documents stored securely in the guest room closet. She had stolen my entire identity. While she was sitting in our community church, crying fake tears about being financially abused while she was sitting in my husband's private study, begging for a loan and playing the persecuted victim, she had already stolen $15,000 of my hard-earned money. She had turned my pristine financial history into her own personal slush fund. I picked up the statement again, my eyes tracing the dates of the transactions. Some of the most expensive charges were made on the exact same day our parents called to guilt-trip me into letting her stay. She was draining my future while they were lecturing me about Christian charity and sisterly duty. The staggering hypocrisy of it all tasted like ash in my mouth. I slowly folded the crisp pages back together and slid them securely into a plain manila folder. I did not cry. I did not scream. A strange clinical calmness washed over my entire body. I am a bookkeeper, and she had just handed me a perfect documented trail of federal wire fraud and identity theft. I carefully placed the folder in my locked briefcase. I placed my hands over my swollen stomach, taking a deep, steadying breath. My sister thought she was dealing with the same quiet, compliant girl she grew up with. She had no idea she had just declared war on a woman who would burn down the world to protect her child and her husband. The silent invasion was officially over. It was time for me to strike back. I sat at the heavy oak dining table for a long time, just staring at the crisp white envelope in my hands. The name printed in the clear plastic window belonged to me, but it was a name I had not used in over 4 years. It was my maiden name. The return address belonged to a premium credit card company that I had never done business with in my entire life. As a professional parish administrator and a meticulous bookkeeper, I have spent my entire adult life organizing numbers. I track every single penny that enters and leaves my household. I balance complex church ledgers with absolute precision. Numbers are my sanctuary because numbers never lie. But the numbers hidden inside this envelope were screaming a terrifying truth that I was not ready to face. My hands began to tremble violently. I placed the envelope flat on the table and picked up my stainless steel letter opener. I sliced the top edge open with a swift, rigid motion and pulled out the thick stack of paper. The glossy pages unfolded to reveal a platinum-tier credit account statement. The account had been opened exactly 14 days ago. That was precisely 2 days after my sister Chloe had arrived on my doorstep crying about being unfairly evicted and begging for a place to stay. I felt all the oxygen completely vanish from the room. I pressed one hand tightly over my 6-month pregnant stomach, trying to steady my breathing to protect my baby from the sudden massive spike of adrenaline flooding my veins. I forced my highly trained eyes to focus on the bold black ink at the top of the page. The current balance due was staggering. $15,000. My mind raced back to that terrible night I had caught Chloe snooping through the nursery in the dark. She had played the terrified victim, perfectly crying about panic attacks and night terrors. She had expertly manipulated me into feeling guilty for even questioning her. But she had not just been looking for my spare house keys or my blank checks. She had been hunting for my tax documents. She had dug through my carefully archived filing boxes in the guest bedroom closet and stolen my Social Security number. I carried the statement into my small home office down the hall and locked the heavy wooden door behind me. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. I did not cry. Crying was a useless emotion right now. I needed cold, hard facts. I logged directly into the major credit bureau portals to run a comprehensive background check on my own identity. The security questions asked me to verify addresses I had not lived at since college. I answered them with cold, mechanical efficiency. When the full credit report finally loaded onto my screen, the sheer scale of her betrayal hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Chloe had not just opened one credit card. She had used my stolen identity to open 3 separate high-limit lines of credit. I clicked through the detailed transaction histories and felt a sickening wave of disgust wash over me. While she was sleeping until noon in my guest room and eating the food I cooked for her, she was systematically destroying my financial future. The itemized charges told a story of absolute, unapologetic greed. There were charges for thousands of dollars at luxury designer boutiques located in downtown Chicago. There were massive bills for premium salon treatments and high-end cosmetic procedures. But the detail that made my blood run freezing cold was the cash advances. Chloe had not just shopped online. She had traveled. She had taken my spare car without asking and driven across state lines. I saw a massive cash withdrawal made at an automated teller machine inside a casino in Detroit, Michigan. I saw another cash advance taken at a luxury resort in Indianapolis, Indiana. She was deliberately moving stolen funds across state borders. As a bookkeeper who handles payroll and church charity funds across different regions, I knew exactly what that meant. Crossing state lines with fraudulently obtained credit was not just a simple family dispute over borrowed money. It was federal wire fraud. A dark, suffocating rage began to build deep inside my chest. I thought about the years I had spent working exhausting double shifts to pay off my student loans. I thought about the careful budget I had built to ensure my unborn daughter would have a beautiful, safe nursery and a secure college fund. I thought about my parents calling me and using my Christian faith as a weapon to guilt-trip me into opening my sanctuary to this parasite. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march straight up the stairs, rip the blankets off the guest bed, and drag my sister out the front door by her expensive, newly highlighted hair. I wanted to throw these printed statements right in her face and watch her pathetic victim mask finally shatter into a million pieces. I grabbed the thick stack of printed credit reports and the original statement. I stood up so fast my chair rolled backward and slammed hard into the wall. I unlocked my office door and marched down the hallway. Every step I took felt heavy with righteous fury. But I did not go to the stairs. I stopped in front of the closed oak door at the very end of the hall. This was my husband David's private study. David had recently been appointed as a federal district court judge. He was a man who spent his days presiding over complex criminal trials. He was brilliant, intensely calm, and possessed a terrifying ability to see straight through any lie. I did not knock. I pushed the heavy door open and walked right inside. David was sitting behind his massive mahogany desk, surrounded by tall stacks of sealed federal case files. The glow from his brass desk lamp illuminated the sharp, serious lines of his face. He looked up from his reading glasses, and the moment he saw my pale, furious face, he immediately dropped his pen. He stood up and walked around the desk, his eyes dark with instant concern. I did not say a word. I simply shoved the massive stack of fraudulent credit card statements directly into his chest. He took the papers from my trembling hands. I paced back and forth across his Persian rug, wrapping my arms protectively around my pregnant belly. I told him everything in a rapid, breathless rush. I told him about catching her in the nursery. I told him about the stolen Social Security number. I told him about the $15,000 in luxury purchases and the cash advances dragged across state borders. I told him I was going upstairs right now to throw her out onto the street and call the local police to press charges. David did not react with explosive anger. He did not yell or curse. He did something much more intimidating. He went perfectly, completely still. He read through the 3 pages of transaction logs with the cold, calculating precision of a federal judge reviewing evidence for a major trial. His eyes scanned the dates, the amounts, and the locations. When he finally looked up at me, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He closed the distance between us and placed his large, warm hands gently on my shoulders. He looked deeply into my eyes, and his voice was low, steady, and absolute. "We do not just get mad, Sarah," he whispered. "We build an airtight case. We let her dig her own grave." I stared up at him, my chest heaving with frustrated anger. I told him I could not sleep another night under the same roof as a woman who was actively trying to destroy our lives. I told him my parents would never believe me without a fight. They would say I was being dramatic. They would say I was a hormonal pregnant woman trying to frame my innocent younger sister. They would accuse me of printing fake documents just to get rid of her. David nodded slowly, acknowledging my fears. "That is exactly why we do not confront her today," he said smoothly. "Your sister is a professional manipulator. If you throw these papers at her right now, she will cry. She will call your parents. She will claim you permitted her to use the cards and that you are just having a pregnancy-induced mental breakdown. She will muddy the waters and the local police might just call it a civil domestic dispute. We are not going to give her the chance to play the victim." He turned and walked back to his desk, carefully placing the fraudulent statements inside a secure locked drawer. He looked back at me with a gaze so fiercely protective it took my breath away. She crossed state lines with stolen financial data. He stated his voice devoid of any mercy. She committed multiple federal felonies. We are going to track every single digital footprint she leaves in this house. We are going to gather forensic evidence so undeniable that neither your parents nor any lawyer can save her. You are going to go back out there and smile at her. You are going to be the perfect welcoming sister. You are going to give her enough rope to hang herself. It was the hardest thing I have ever had to do in my entire life. I walked out of his study, took several deep breaths, and forced my facial muscles to relax into a pleasant mask. For the next 3 days, I played my part perfectly. I cooked Chloe breakfast. I asked her politely about her day. I smiled warmly while she complained about the weather and casually asked if she could borrow my car again. Every time she spoke to me, I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from screaming. But behind the polite smiles, my counterattack was already quietly in motion. With David's guidance, I shifted from an angry victim into a silent, meticulous investigator. While Chloe spent her afternoons locked inside the guest room, supposedly resting from her mysterious anxiety attacks, I sat at my computer and began monitoring the digital traffic flowing through our home network. I am not a professional computer hacker, but managing the complex payroll and administrative networks at my church requires a solid understanding of network security and router logs. I logged into our main home router using the administrative credentials. The interface displayed a list of all devices currently connected to our wireless internet. I easily identified Chloe's expensive new smartphone and her silver laptop. I started pulling the activity logs, specifically isolating the web traffic coming directly from her devices. I fully expected to see endless hours of online shopping on luxury boutique websites. I expected to see her bragging on social media or browsing expensive vacation packages. And I did see those things. But as I scrolled deeper into the daily traffic logs, something highly unusual caught my attention. Chloe was not just browsing the open internet. The logs showed dozens of persistent, repeated requests being routed toward local internal addresses on our home network. She was running internal ping requests. She was actively mapping the devices connected to our house. I leaned closer to the glowing monitor, my heart beginning to pound a heavy, rhythmic warning against my ribs. I filtered the search queries she had typed into search engines over the past 48 hours. The search terms were not about fashion or vacations. The phrases sent a fresh wave of ice-cold dread directly down my spine. She had been searching for tutorials on how to bypass local network encryption. She was reading articles on how to crack administrative passwords for external storage drives. She was actively researching ways to intercept local wireless traffic. My breath caught in my throat. I quickly cross-referenced the internal network addresses she had been persistently trying to ping. She was not trying to hack into my personal laptop. She was not trying to access the smart television or the home security cameras. The specific numerical address her laptop kept attempting to contact belonged to the secure encrypted server located directly inside David's private home office. The gravity of the situation slammed into me with terrifying force. David was a federal district court judge. His private server was heavily encrypted for a very specific reason. It contained highly sensitive sealed federal court documents. It held unredacted witness testimonies, classified legal briefs, and confidential grand jury evidence for ongoing major criminal trials. Chloe had already stolen $15,000 using my name. She knew I would eventually find out about the credit cards. She was preparing for her next move. She was trying to break into a federal judicial server to steal sealed court documents. I sat frozen in my chair, realizing she was completely oblivious to the fact that she was no longer just committing financial fraud against her sister. She was actively attempting to commit federal espionage. She was planning to steal classified government information right out of a judge's home to sell or use for blackmail. The silent invasion had just escalated into a catastrophic federal crime. The router logs had revealed a terrifying truth. My younger sister was actively trying to hack into a federal judicial server right inside my own home. When I had showed David the digital network requests the previous night, his face had turned to stone. He had told me we needed irrefutable proof before making a move that involved federal authorities. I knew I could not just confront Chloe with a printed piece of paper showing her internet search history. She was a professional, lifelong manipulator. If I confronted her with technical logs, she would just twist the narrative. She would start crying. She would call our parents and tell them she was only trying to connect her laptop to the wireless printer, and I was acting like a paranoid hormonal woman. My parents would believe her without a single question. They always believed her over me. I needed undeniable visual proof. I needed to catch her completely red-handed committing the crime. I took the morning off from my job at the parish office. I told the church elders I had a routine medical appointment for my high-risk pregnancy. Instead, I drove 3 towns over to a massive electronics retail store where I knew absolutely nobody would recognize my face. I walked straight to the home security aisle. I did not want a standard security camera that she might spot. Chloe was deceptive, but she was also incredibly observant when it came to noticing changes in her environment. I needed something absolutely invisible. I found exactly what I was looking for. It was a high-definition nanny camera, perfectly hidden inside a fully functional digital air purifier. It had a sleek, modern black exterior that would blend flawlessly with the heavy mahogany furniture and leather-bound books in David's private study. The device recorded in full high-definition video and streamed a live encrypted feed directly to a secure application on my cell phone. I paid in cash so the purchase would not appear on any joint bank statements. I drove home with my heart hammering against my ribcage. The house was completely empty when I arrived. Chloe had taken a ride-sharing car downtown to meet a man she had recently started dating. His name was Brian. He was a local defense attorney who drove a flashy imported sports car and wore expensive tailored suits. I walked into David's study and locked the heavy oak door behind me. The room smelled like cedar and old paper. I placed the new air purifier on the top shelf of the tall bookcase directly across from the desk. I plugged it into the wall completely out of sight and synced it to my phone. I stepped back and opened the application to test the viewing angle. The camera captured the entire room perfectly. It had an absolutely unobstructed view of the heavy steel filing cabinet where David kept his physical sealed case files. I turned on the motion detection alert system. I adjusted the air purifier to its lowest setting so it would hum quietly and naturally in the background. The trap was officially set. The next few days were absolute psychological torture. I had to live in the same house with the woman who was actively trying to destroy my husband's career. I had to sit across the kitchen island from her while she buttered her morning toast and complained about how boring the suburbs were. I had to listen to her talk while knowing she had already stolen $15,000 using my stolen identity. Every single time my cell phone vibrated with an email or a calendar reminder, my stomach would violently drop. I would hold my breath thinking it was the motion alert from the study. But the weekend passed in an agonizing, heavy silence. David kept his study firmly locked whenever he was not inside working. Chloe spent most of her time sitting on the living room sofa texting Brian and watching mindless reality television. I played the part of the gracious, welcoming sister with absolute perfection. I cooked her meals. I smiled when she spoke to me. I politely asked her questions about her new boyfriend. She told me Brian was incredibly successful and that he treated her like an absolute queen. She had this smug little smile on her face when she talked about him. She looked at me with pity in her eyes. She genuinely thought she was so much smarter than me. She thought I was just a boring church bookkeeper trapped in a boring domestic life. She had no idea I was quietly monitoring every single move she made. Tuesday morning arrived with heavy rain. It was a chaotic day at the community church. I was sitting at my large wooden desk in the administrative office surrounded by towering stacks of donation receipts and complex payroll ledgers. The church was preparing for a massive charity auction event, and I was the person responsible for managing the entire operating budget. My 6-month pregnant belly was pressing uncomfortably against the edge of the desk. I was physically exhausted. My lower back throbbed with a dull, constant ache that never seemed to fade. The parish hall right outside my office was buzzing loudly with volunteers setting up tables and folding chairs. I was listening to the gentle sounds of the church choir practicing hymns down the hall. I took a slow sip of my decaf coffee and reached for my desktop calculator to verify a vendor invoice. Then my cell phone vibrated sharply against the hard surface of the desk. It was not a text message. It was a high-priority push notification from the hidden camera application. The screen lit up with a bold warning message. Motion detected in the study. All the ambient noise in the busy church office instantly faded away into a dull, distant ringing in my ears. I dropped my pen. My hands started to shake so violently I had to grip the edge of the desk with all my strength just to steady myself. I grabbed my phone and tapped the notification. The application loaded for 2 agonizingly long seconds. The spinning loading circle felt like it was mocking my anxiety. Then the live video feed connected. The high-definition camera inside the air purifier offered a crystal-clear, brightly lit view of the study. The heavy oak door was completely shut. Standing right in the middle of the room, illuminated by the desk lamp, was my sister Chloe. She was absolutely not supposed to be in there. David had locked that door securely before he left for the federal courthouse that morning. I watched in sheer absolute horror as my sister pulled a small silver tension wrench and a professional lock-picking tool from the front pocket of her expensive designer jeans. She had actually purchased a lock-picking kit. She had clearly been practicing for this exact moment. She knelt down on the Persian rug right in front of David's heavy steel filing cabinet. The bottom drawer of that cabinet was where he kept the most sensitive physical documents for his ongoing federal trials. My breath hitched in my throat. I sat completely frozen in my ergonomic office chair, totally paralyzed by the sheer breathtaking audacity of what I was witnessing on my small digital screen. Chloe worked the lock on the filing cabinet for less than 60 seconds. She was surprisingly fast and efficient. The heavy steel drawer slid open with a soft metallic click that echoed through the microphone on the camera feed. She did not hesitate for a single second. She reached deep inside the drawer and pulled out a thick manila folder stamped with bold red federal court confidential markings. She opened the folder and laid the documents flat on the floor. Then she pulled out her silver cell phone. I watched her open the camera application on her phone. She leaned over the documents and started taking high-resolution photographs of every single page. She was methodically photographing unredacted witness lists. She was photographing sealed grand jury testimonies. She was photographing confidential evidence logs for a major upcoming federal racketeering trial. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in my mind with a sickening, devastating clarity. Chloe was not just snooping through my house out of idle, bored curiosity. She was not just looking for blank checks or credit cards anymore. She had started dating Brian. Brian was a local defense attorney who frequently represented high-profile clients tied to organized crime syndicates. Those were the exact kind of violent, dangerous clients David was currently prosecuting in his federal courtroom. Chloe was deliberately stealing classified insider information from a sitting federal judge to give to her defense attorney boyfriend. She was probably planning to sell it to him for a massive payout or use it to secure her luxurious lifestyle. She was actively committing federal espionage right in the middle of my home. She was jeopardizing ongoing criminal trials and putting innocent civilian witnesses in mortal physical danger just so she could impress a man who drove a fast car. She was going to trade my husband, career, and human lives for a quick payday. My sister was no longer just a lazy, entitled brat who relied on my parents for money. She was a massive, catastrophic legal liability. If anyone found out those sealed documents had been compromised inside our house, David would be completely ruined. His flawless professional reputation would be destroyed overnight. The Federal Judicial Board would strip him of his lifetime appointment in absolute disgrace. He could even face severe criminal charges for failing to properly secure classified government materials. Our entire world, our entire future, everything we had meticulously built for our unborn child was sitting on that rug while my sister casually photographed it with her cell phone. I thought about my parents telling me it was my Christian duty to take her in. They had forced a federal criminal into my sanctuary. A fierce primal rage exploded deep inside my chest. It was a protective maternal fury so intense it literally blurred my vision. I slammed my laptop shut so hard the plastic cracked. I grabbed my car keys and my purse. I did not even tell the church volunteers where I was going. I did not care about the charity auction or the payroll ledgers anymore. I sprinted out of the administrative office as fast as my pregnant body would possibly allow. I ignored the confused, worried looks from the senior church elders in the hallway. I pushed through the heavy glass double doors and burst out into the bright, glaring morning sunlight. I practically threw myself into the driver's seat of my sedan. I jammed the key into the ignition and slammed my foot heavily down on the gas pedal. The tires screeched violently against the wet asphalt of the church parking lot. My heart was pounding a frantic, desperate rhythm against my ribs. My pregnant belly felt incredibly tight and hard with raw adrenaline and stress. I was gripping the leather steering wheel so hard, my knuckles were completely white and my fingernails dug into my palms. I sped down the quiet suburban streets, completely ignoring every single speed limit sign I passed. I kept glancing down at my phone sitting in the cup holder, watching the live video feed. She was still in the study. She was moving to a second classified folder now. She was completely oblivious to the hurricane heading straight for her. The silent invasion had crossed an unforgivable legal line. This was no longer just about protecting my personal credit score from a selfish sibling. This was no longer just a petty family rivalry over money or our parents' attention. My sister was actively trying to destroy the father of my child and jeopardize the federal justice system. I was going to burst through that heavy front door and stop her right in her tracks. I sped toward my neighborhood, a dangerous, righteous fire burning brightly in my veins. My sister thought she could outsmart me because I was just a quiet church administrator. But she was about to learn exactly what happens when you threaten the family of a woman who is ready to burn down the entire world to protect her home. She was no longer dealing with a compliant sister. She was dealing with a mother protecting her young. I drove my sedan out of the church parking lot with a terrifying speed, my tires practically tearing the wet asphalt from the pavement. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel with a force that turned my knuckles completely white, my heart hammering a frantic, violent rhythm against my ribcage. This was no longer just a petty family dispute over borrowed money or an annoying sister extending her stay. My younger sister was actively committing federal espionage inside my home, attempting to compromise the highly classified judicial files my husband guarded with his entire career. Every speed limit sign I ignored, every yellow light I pushed through, was fueled by a primal, overwhelming maternal instinct. I placed one hand protectively over my 6-month pregnant belly, feeling my baby kick sharply against the tight drum of my stomach. I was not going to let this toxic, entitled parasite destroy the safe sanctuary I had built. I was not going to let her steal my husband's reputation and my child's future just to impress a defense attorney who drove a flashy sports car. I pulled aggressively into our driveway, slammed the gear shift into park, and left my purse sitting abandoned on the passenger seat. I grabbed the thick manila folder containing the printed credit card statements and the high-definition screenshots from the hidden camera. The heavy oak front door swung open under my force, hitting the entryway wall with a loud, resounding crack that echoed through the entire quiet house. I marched straight down the hallway and into the bright kitchen. Chloe was standing by the marble island, casually pouring herself a glass of expensive, sparkling water. She was wearing my premium silk bathrobe, the one David had bought me for our anniversary, draped carelessly over her shoulders. She looked up, startled by the sudden noise, her perfectly manicured eyebrows raising in mock innocence. "Sarah, what are you doing home so early?" she asked, her voice dripping with that cloying, fake sweetness she always used when pretending to be the perfect houseguest. "You look absolutely unhinged." I did not scream. I did not yell. The time for emotional outbursts had completely passed. I walked straight up to the kitchen island and slammed the thick manila folder down onto the marble surface with a deafening smack. The impact sent her sparkling water splashing over the rim of her glass. I ripped the folder open and spread the documents out in a perfect, undeniable fan of cold, hard evidence. "I know exactly what you are doing," I said, my voice dropping into a low, dangerous register that I did not even recognize as my own. It was the cold, calculating tone of a senior bookkeeper who had just uncovered massive financial fraud. I pointed to the first stack of crisp papers. "That is $15,000 in fraudulent credit card charges opened under my maiden name and my social security number. You crossed state lines to make cash withdrawals in Detroit and Indianapolis. That is federal wire fraud and identity theft." Chloe stared at the papers, the color draining rapidly from her face, leaving her pale and exposed. But before she could even formulate a lie, I slammed the next piece of evidence right on top of the financial statements. It was a clear, high-definition, full-color photograph, printed on premium glossy paper. It showed Chloe kneeling in David's private study, a lock-picking tool in her hand, actively photographing sealed federal court documents with her cell phone. "And this," I continued, leaning forward until I was inches from her face, "is you committing federal espionage against a sitting United States judge. You are stealing classified grand jury testimonies to sell to your new boyfriend. You did not just steal from me, Chloe. You have committed multiple federal felonies right inside my home." For exactly 3 seconds, My sister looked genuinely completely terrified. The mask of the helpless innocent victim shattered entirely, revealing the panicked, calculating criminal underneath. Her eyes darted wildly around the kitchen, looking for an escape route, looking for a way to twist the narrative. But she was a professional, lifelong manipulator, and professional manipulators never surrender. They simply changed their tactics. I watched, absolutely mesmerized by the sheer sociopathic speed of it, as her terror instantly melted into a flawless, theatrical performance of victimhood. Her eyes filled with massive, glistening tears. Her bottom lip began to tremble violently. She took a dramatic step back, clutching her chest, as if I had just physically struck her. "I have no idea what these fake pictures are," she stammered, her voice rising in a panicked crescendo. "You are making this up. You printed these fake things because you hate me. You have always been insanely jealous of me." Without waiting for my response, she snatched her cell phone from the counter. Her fingers flew across the screen, dialing the one number she knew would always answer her call for rescue. She put the phone on speaker, ensuring I could hear every single word of her performance. Our father, Pastor John, answered on the second ring. "Daddy!" Chloe screamed into the phone, letting out a harrowing, guttural sob that sounded incredibly real. "Daddy, please help me. You have to come over here right now. Sarah has completely lost her mind." I stood frozen, watching her put on the performance of a lifetime. She paced back and forth across the kitchen floor, hyperventilating on command. She came home from work early and just started screaming at me. She's throwing fake papers in my face and telling me she's going to send me to federal prison. "Daddy, she is having some kind of pregnancy-induced psychotic break. Her hormones are completely out of control, and I am terrified she's going to physically hurt me." The line erupted with the booming, authoritative voice of my father, immediately joined by the frantic, aggressive demands of my mother, Linda, who was clearly listening in the background. They did not ask to speak to me. They did not ask for my side of the story. They told Chloe to lock herself in the guest bathroom and promised they were on their way. The drive from my parents' house to my neighborhood usually took 20 minutes. They made it in 10. The heavy oak front door practically burst off its hinges as Pastor John and Linda stormed into my home. They did not take off their shoes. They did not greet me. They marched directly into the kitchen, their faces twisted with righteous, deeply misguided fury. Chloe immediately ran to them, burying her face into our mother's shoulder, sobbing uncontrollably. Linda wrapped her arms fiercely around the golden child, glaring at me as if I were a dangerous, unstable monster who had just attacked an innocent bystander. "What is wrong with you, Sarah?" my mother hissed, her voice dripping with pure disgust. "Have you completely lost your mind? Look at your sister. She is trembling. She came to you for help because she was homeless and vulnerable. And this is how you treat her." I refused to be intimidated in my own house. I stood my ground, pointing a firm, unwavering finger at the marble kitchen island. "Look at the table, Mom. Just look at the physical evidence. She stole my social security number. She racked up $15,000 in fraudulent credit card debt. And she broke into David's locked study to photograph classified federal court documents. She is committing severe federal crimes." My father, a man who had built his entire career preaching about truth and moral integrity from a highly elevated church pulpit, did not even glance at the papers I had meticulously laid out. He simply waved his hand dismissively, actively refusing to look at the undeniable facts that contradicted his deeply ingrained narrative of the perfect family. "You are being completely hysterical, Sarah," Pastor John boomed, using his powerful, resonant preaching voice to try and shrink me back into the compliant, quiet daughter I used to be. "Your pregnancy hormones are completely out of control. You are seeing things that are not there. Chloe is just a lost soul trying to find her way in a dark world. It is your fundamental Christian duty to forgive her, not to fabricate these ridiculous paranoid delusions about espionage and fraud." "It is not a delusion," I fired back, my voice rising to match his volume. "It is printed right there in black and white. There are time-stamped video screenshots. She is trying to destroy David's career." My mother stepped forward, placing herself as a physical shield between me and the kitchen island. "Even if she made a small financial mistake," Linda argued, completely dismissing the massive theft, "families do not call the police on each other. Families protect each other. You are acting like a cold, heartless corporate machine. Where is your compassion? Where is your sisterly love? You need to calm down before you hurt the baby with all this unnecessary manufactured drama." The sheer absolute absurdity of the situation left me breathless. I was standing in my own kitchen 6 months pregnant, presenting undeniable forensic evidence of massive financial and federal crimes, and my parents were telling me I was the one causing drama. They were weaponizing my pregnancy, calling me hysterical and hormonal simply to protect the golden child from facing a single consequence for her actions. I looked at my father, my eyes hard and unyielding. "I am not dropping this," I stated with absolute terrifying clarity. She crossed state lines with stolen credit. She attempted to compromise a federal judge's chambers. I am calling the authorities and she is leaving my house today. Right now. Pastor John's face turned a dangerous mottled shade of crimson. He was a man used to absolute obedience, a man who controlled his congregation and his family with unquestionable authority. The fact that I, his quiet, historically compliant daughter, was standing firm and refusing to back down infuriated him beyond measure. He realized that his usual tactics of religious guilt and emotional manipulation were completely failing to break my resolve. "You are impossible to reason with in this state," my father growled, turning his back on me in disgust. He pulled his cell phone from his jacket pocket. "I am going to call David. I need to speak to him man to man. He needs to come home right now and bring his wife to heel before you completely destroy this family over your hormonal paranoia." Without waiting for a response, my father stormed out of the kitchen and marched toward the front door, stepping out onto the covered porch to make his phone call in private. My mother, always the diligent enforcer of his authority, immediately followed him to manage his temper and coordinate their strategy. The heavy front door clicked shut behind them, sealing them outside in the warm afternoon heat. The sudden profound silence in the house was deafening. The screaming had stopped. The frantic accusations had ceased. The kitchen was completely still. For the very first time since this nightmare had begun weeks ago, Sarah and Chloe were left completely, utterly alone. I turned slowly back to face my sister. The transformation was instantaneous and blood-chilling. The moment the heavy front door latched shut behind our parents, Chloe's performative sobbing stopped dead. The fake tears dried up in an instant. The trembling victim routine vanished into thin air. She dropped her hands from her face and stood up perfectly straight. She looked at me across the marble island, her lips curled into a slow, dark, incredibly venomous smile. The mask was finally entirely gone. We were alone, and the real confrontation was just about to begin. I refused to be intimidated in my own house. I stood my ground, pointing a firm, unwavering finger at the marble kitchen island. "Look at the table, Mom. Just look at the physical evidence. She stole my Social Security number. She racked up $15,000 in fraudulent credit card debt. And she broke into David's locked study to photograph classified federal court documents. She is committing severe federal crimes." My father, a man who had built his entire career preaching about truth and moral integrity from a highly elevated church pulpit, did not even glance at the papers I had meticulously laid out. He simply waved his hand dismissively, actively refusing to look at the undeniable facts that contradicted his deeply ingrained narrative of the perfect family. "You are being completely hysterical, Sarah," Pastor John boomed, using his powerful, resonant preaching voice to try and shrink me back into the compliant, quiet daughter I used to be. "Your pregnancy hormones are completely out of control. You are seeing things that are not there. Chloe is just a lost soul trying to find her way in a dark world. It is your fundamental Christian duty to forgive her, not to fabricate these ridiculous paranoid delusions about espionage and fraud." "It is not a delusion," I fired back, my voice rising to match his volume. "It is printed right there in black and white. There are time-stamped video screenshots. She is trying to destroy David's career." My mother stepped forward, placing herself as a physical shield between me and the kitchen island. Even if she made a small financial mistake, Linda argued, completely dismissing the massive theft. Families do not call the police on each other. Families protect each other. You are acting like a cold, heartless corporate machine. Where is your compassion? Where is your sisterly love? You need to calm down before you hurt the baby with all this unnecessary manufactured drama. The sheer absolute absurdity of the situation left me breathless. I was standing in my own kitchen 6 months pregnant, presenting undeniable forensic evidence of massive financial and federal crimes, and my parents were telling me I was the one causing drama. They were weaponizing my pregnancy, calling me hysterical and hormonal, simply to protect the golden child from facing a single consequence for her actions. I looked at my father, my eyes hard and unyielding. "I am not dropping this," I stated with absolute terrifying clarity. She crossed state lines with stolen credit. She attempted to compromise a federal judge's chambers. I am calling the authorities, and she is leaving my house today. Right now. Pastor John's face turned a dangerous, mottled shade of crimson. He was a man used to absolute obedience, a man who controlled his congregation and his family with unquestionable authority. The fact that I, his quiet, historically compliant daughter, was standing firm and refusing to back down infuriated him beyond measure. He realized that his usual tactics of religious guilt and emotional manipulation were completely failing to break my resolve. "You are impossible to reason with in this state," my father growled, turning his back on me in disgust. He pulled his cell phone from his jacket pocket. "I am going to call David. I need to speak to him man to man. He needs to come home right now and bring his wife to heel before you completely destroy this family over your hormonal paranoia." Without waiting for a response, my father stormed out of the kitchen and marched toward the front door, stepping out onto the covered porch to make his phone call in private. My mother, always the diligent enforcer of his authority, immediately followed him to manage his temper and coordinate their strategy. The heavy front door clicked shut behind them, sealing them outside in the warm afternoon heat. The sudden profound silence in the house was deafening. The screaming had stopped. The frantic accusations had ceased. The kitchen was completely still. For the very first time since this nightmare had begun weeks ago, Sarah and Chloe were left completely, utterly alone. I turned slowly back to face my sister. The transformation was instantaneous and blood-chilling. The moment the heavy front door latched shut behind our parents, Chloe's performative sobbing stopped dead. The fake tears dried up in an instant. The trembling victim routine vanished into thin air. She dropped her hands from her face and stood up perfectly straight. She looked at me across the marble island. Her lips curled into a slow, dark, incredibly venomous smile. The mask was finally entirely gone. We were alone, and the real confrontation was just about to begin. She smoothed down the front of my expensive silk bathrobe that she was still casually wearing. She looked across the kitchen island at me, and her face twisted into a sneer of pure, unfiltered disgust. The fragile, misunderstood younger sister routine had melted away entirely. What stood before me was the real Chloe, the entitled, calculating predator my parents had spent their entire lives protecting. "You really think you are so incredibly smart, do you not?" "Sarah," she said, her voice dropping its high-pitched, innocent tone for a cruel, mocking drawl. "You think because you sit at a desk balancing boring church ledgers all day, that you have the right to look down on me?" I stared at her, my hands resting protectively over my swollen stomach. "I am not looking down on you, Chloe. I am looking at undeniable forensic evidence of federal crimes. You stole my identity. You stole my money. You tried to steal my husband's classified documents." She actually laughed. A sharp, dismissive sound that echoed off the high ceilings of my beautiful home. "Oh, please." She rolled her eyes, walking slowly around the kitchen island toward me. $15,000 is absolutely nothing to a federal judge. David makes a fortune. You live in this massive, gorgeous house, and you do not even know how to enjoy it. You dress like a middle-aged librarian. You spend your weekends organizing pantries and going to church meetings. You have all this wealth, all this status, and you completely waste it. She stopped a few feet away from me, her eyes burning with a dark, venomous jealousy that took my breath away. "I deserve this life, Sarah. I deserve the beautiful house and the luxury cars and the expensive vacations. I am the one who knows how to network. I am the one who knows how to be charming. You only got lucky because David settled for someone safe and boring. And those court files, Brian said those documents are worth a fortune to the right defense lawyers. Why should you and David hoard all this power and money when I am out there struggling to survive? The sheer breathtaking audacity of her entitlement hit me like a physical blow. She genuinely believed her own twisted logic. She truly believed that because she desired a life of luxury, she had the absolute right to steal it from me. She felt zero remorse for committing identity theft or espionage. In her mind, I was just an obstacle standing in the way of what she rightfully deserved. I felt a cold, righteous fury lock my spine into place. I did not shrink back. I did not cower. I drew myself up to my full height, pulling my shoulders back. I am a mother protecting her child, a wife protecting her husband, and a woman defending her sanctuary. I looked my younger sister dead in the eyes, and I let all the pity and sisterly obligation I had carried for 28 years completely die. You are a pathetic, empty shell of a human being, I told her, my voice eerily calm and steady. You have never worked a hard day in your entire life. You use people until they are drained dry, and then you play the victim when they finally set a boundary. But your little performance is officially over. You are not going to ruin my marriage. You are not going to jeopardize my husband's federal career to impress a sleazy local defense attorney. And you are certainly not going to spend one more second under my roof. I raised my arm and pointed a rigid finger directly toward the grand staircase in the foyer. Go upstairs right now, I commanded. Pack your bags and get out of my house. If you are not out of that front door in 5 minutes, I am calling the federal authorities myself, and I will hand them the video footage of you breaking into a federal judge filing cabinet. Get out. I saw the exact moment her fragile, massive ego completely shattered. For her entire life, Chloe had been the undisputed golden child. Pastor John and Linda had always bent over backwards to accommodate her every single whim. No one had ever spoken to her with such absolute, unforgiving authority. No one had ever told her no and actually meant it. The realization that she had lost all control over me, that her manipulation had completely failed, sent her into a blind, terrifying rage. Her face turned a mottled, furious red. Her eyes widened into a wild, manic glare. You cannot tell me what to do, she screamed, her voice cracking with raw fury. This is my family too. You are supposed to take care of me. You owe me. I owe you nothing, I stated, turning my back slightly to reach for my cell phone on the kitchen counter. I am calling the police. I never saw the attack coming. I never in a million years believed that my own flesh and blood, the sister I had shared a childhood bedroom with, would resort to physical violence against a pregnant woman. But toxic people are the most dangerous when they realize they can no longer control you. As I reached for the phone, Chloe let out a guttural, animalistic shriek of pure rage. She lunged across the short distance between us with terrifying speed. She did not aim for my face. She did not aim for my arms. With deliberate, calculated cruelty, she pulled back her right leg and delivered a brutal, vicious kick directly into my 6-month pregnant stomach. The physical impact was deafening. It felt like a heavy concrete block had been swung full force into my abdomen. The sheer kinetic shock of the blow lifted my feet entirely off the ground. A blinding, searing flash of white-hot agony exploded behind my eyes, radiating outward from my center and violently ripping through every single nerve ending in my body. All the oxygen was instantly punched out of my lungs in one horrific rush. I was entirely airborne for a fraction of a second before gravity reclaimed me. I collapsed backward, crashing violently onto the unforgiving solid hardwood floor of the kitchen. My shoulder struck the ground, first sending a jarring wave of pain up my neck, but I did not even care about that. My hands immediately flew to my swollen stomach, clutching my belly with a desperate, frantic terror. I lay there on the cold wood, completely paralyzed by the blinding agony. I could not breathe. I opened my mouth to scream, to call out for help, but my paralyzed diaphragm refused to pull in any air. I was suffocating on dry land, gasping silently like a fish thrown onto a dock. The pain in my stomach was not just a surface ache. It was a deep, terrifying internal cramping that twisted my insides into agonizing knots. But the physical agony was absolutely nothing compared to the crushing, overwhelming psychological terror that instantly consumed me. My baby. My precious, innocent baby girl. I pressed my trembling palms against my stomach, desperate to feel a kick, a flutter, any sign of life. But beneath my hands, my abdomen felt unnaturally tight, hard as a rock, and entirely still. A silent, agonizing sob tore through my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut silently, begging and pleading with any higher power that would listen to spare my unborn child. Please do not let her kill my baby. Please keep my little girl safe. The world around me blurred and spun dizzily. Through the ringing in my ears, I could hear the sound of heavy rain continuing to drum against the bay windows, a stark contrast to the absolute nightmare unfolding inside my home. I managed to open my tear-filled eyes, blinking rapidly to clear my vision. Chloe was standing right over me. She was looking down at my gasping, writhing body on the floor. There was no horror on her face. There was no sudden realization of the monstrous thing she had just done. There was no sisterly remorse. Instead, I watched her eyes dart quickly toward the front door, calculating her next move with the cold precision of a sociopath. She knew our parents were just outside on the porch. She knew they would be coming back inside at any moment. And she knew she needed a cover story. I watched utterly helpless and paralyzed by pain as my sister began to systematically stage a crime scene. She grabbed the collar of my beautiful silk bathrobe she was wearing and violently ripped it downward, tearing the delicate fabric. She reached up and frantically dragged her fingernails through her own perfectly styled blonde hair, messing it up to look as though she had been dragged by the scalp. She took a step backward and deliberately kicked her own bare toe hard against the heavy base of the marble kitchen island, letting out a sharp hiss of pain to ensure she had a visible injury. She was preparing to play the ultimate victim. She was going to tell our parents that I had completely lost my mind, that my pregnancy hormones had caused a violent psychotic break, and that I had physically attacked her. She was going to claim that she only kicked my stomach in desperate self-defense to stop me from hurting her. And the most terrifying part was, I knew our father and mother would believe her without a single question. They always believed her. She took a deep breath, puffed out her chest, and opened her mouth to unleash a fake, blood-curdling scream for our parents. But she never got the chance to make a sound. Before a single note of her fake scream could leave her throat, the heavy brass deadbolt on the front door clicked loudly. The sound echoed like a gunshot through the silent, tense house. The massive oak front door swung open with a heavy, forceful creak. The cold, damp wind from the storm outside swept into the grand foyer, carrying with it the undeniable, terrifying presence of absolute authority. My husband David stepped over the threshold. He had come home early from the federal courthouse. He was wearing his dark, tailored charcoal suit, his heavy wool overcoat draped over his arm, his leather briefcase in his hand. He stepped into the foyer and stopped dead in his tracks. From where he stood, he had a perfectly clear, completely unobstructed view, straight down the hallway and directly into the bright kitchen. He did not see a misunderstanding. He did not see a mutual sisterly argument. He saw the undeniable, horrific reality of the situation. He saw his sister-in-law standing in the middle of his kitchen, actively ripping her own clothes and messing her own hair with a look of calculating deceit on her face. And then his dark, highly observant eyes traveled downward. He saw me. He saw his wife, 6 months pregnant with his first child, lying helplessly on the hardwood floor, clutching her swollen stomach, weeping silently and gasping desperately for air in paralyzing agony. He saw absolutely everything. The air in the house completely changed. The temperature seemed to drop to freezing. David slowly closed the heavy oak door behind him, the latch clicking shut with a final, terrifying sound of impending doom. He dropped his leather briefcase onto the floor. It hit the wood with a heavy, solid thud. He did not yell. He did not rush forward in a panic. He simply stood there, his dark eyes locking onto Chloe with a look of such absolute, unforgiving, cold wrath that it made the blood in my own veins run completely cold. The afternoon sun slanted across my hospital room. But the cold dread in my stomach refused to thaw. 2 weeks had passed since the accident, yet the physical trauma was already beginning to be eclipsed by a sharper, more surgical kind of pain. David had entered the room moments after the police arrived, and he had not uttered a single word of panic. His reaction was terrifyingly cold, precise, and utterly commanding. While I gasped for air on the hardwood floor of our home, struggling against the shock of my sister's violence, David had not descended into the hysteria I might have expected. Instead, he had moved with the clinical efficiency of a man who dealt in evidence and order. He had summoned an ambulance with a single calm directive to the dispatcher, his voice carrying the weight of a federal appointment that brooked no argument. Then he had dialed 911 for the police, explicitly detailing the domestic assault, the attempted theft of federal documents, and the physical threat to his pregnant wife. When the local officers arrived, Chloe had instantly attempted to scramble into her familiar role, her face collapsing into a mask of tearful innocence. She had pointed a trembling finger at me, shrieking to the officers that I had attacked her, that I was having a mental health crisis, and that she was merely defending herself. I had been too weak to speak, but I did not need to. David had simply stepped into the officer's field of vision, his presence filling the foyer with an undeniable heavy authority. He did not raise his voice, nor did he need to argue. He had calmly handed the lead officer the time-stamped video evidence from our study and a brief, lucid account of the trespass and assault. The officer's expression had shifted instantly, the skepticism vanishing as he watched the footage of my sister picking the lock to a federal cabinet. Chloe was hauled away in handcuffs, her screams of denial echoing off our walls, sounding shrill and hollow against the calm professionalism of the responding officers. The relief of her departure had been so absolute that it nearly caused me to faint. I was rushed to the ER, the siren's wail blending into the pounding of my own heart. The agonizing tension in that ambulance ride broke only when the triage nurse placed the Doppler monitor over my belly. The clear, rhythmic thumping of our baby's heartbeat was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The baby was safe, shielded by the grace of luck and the strength of the medical team. But the doctor had been clear. I was placed on strict bed rest for the remainder of the pregnancy to prevent any further complications from the trauma. I lay in the hospital bed exhausted when my phone chimed. It was a message from Chloe sent from her local county jail cell. My parents had already managed to bail her out. The text was a direct, mocking jab. It read, "A misdemeanor assault charge. Is that all you could manage? I will get probation, and I will be out before the sun sets. You really thought you could ruin my life with a little drama, but you are nothing, Sarah. You cannot touch me." I stared at the screen, my hands trembling not from fear, but from the sudden chilling clarity of her delusion. She had no idea what was coming. She thought she was still playing a game with a parish administrator, but she had failed to realize that she was now fully within the reach of a federal judge's cold, unyielding wrath. The rhythmic beeping of the fetal heart monitor was the only sound tethering me to sanity in the bleak and sterile environment of the maternity ward. I lay completely flat in the rigid hospital bed, staring blankly at the porous acoustic ceiling tiles, while the agonizing and sharp pain in my abdomen slowly dulled into a heavy and continuous throbbing ache. The emergency room doctor, a stern woman with kind eyes, had assured me just hours ago that my baby girl was safe. She had explained that the baby was protected by a profound miracle and a thick, resilient layer of amniotic fluid, but she had been incredibly firm in her diagnosis. I was immediately placed on strict and uncompromising bed rest. I was confined to this cold, unfamiliar room with absolutely nothing but my own dark thoughts and the terrifying, intrusive memory of my younger sister swinging her foot directly into my swollen stomach. The sheer and unadulterated malicious intent of that brutal kick played on a continuous, agonizing loop in my mind. Chloe had not lashed out in blind panic. She had looked at me with cold calculation. She had wanted to hurt me. She had wanted to permanently destroy the family I was building simply because she felt an overwhelming toxic entitlement to the peace and luxury of my life. David sat vigil beside my bed in a hard and uncomfortable plastic chair. He had not left my side for a single solitary second since the paramedics rushed me through the glaring lights of the emergency bay doors. He was still wearing his dark tailored charcoal suit, though his silk tie was loosened and his heavy suit jacket was draped carelessly over the back of the chair. But it was his face that commanded my entire and undivided attention. My husband is a man widely known for his deep and endless well of patience and his steady, comforting, grounded presence. But the man sitting next to me was absolutely not the gentle and soft-spoken husband who had spent his weekends joyfully painting soft pink walls in our unfinished nursery. He was a sitting federal district court judge who had just watched a dangerous parasite attempt to murder his unborn child and systematically sabotage his entire judicial career. His dark eyes were completely devoid of any familiar warmth. They burned with a cold and terrifying, fiercely protective fury that made the very air in the small hospital room feel incredibly heavy and dense. He held my right hand firmly in his thumb tracing slow and methodical grounding circles over my pale knuckles. I looked at him, my voice sounding incredibly raspy, weak and broken. She actually sent me a text message from the local county jail. Mom and Dad already rushed down there and bailed her out. She mocked me, David. She typed out a message saying it was just a minor misdemeanor assault charge and that she would only get a few months of easy probation. She explicitly told me that I was completely powerless and that I could not ruin her life. David immediately stopped tracing those comforting circles on my hand. He looked down at the linoleum floor for a long and heavy moment, taking a deep, slow, measured breath that expanded his broad chest. When he finally lifted his intense gaze to meet mine, the absolute and chilling stillness in his expression sent an involuntary shiver straight down my spine. She genuinely thinks this is a simple local domestic dispute, David whispered, his voice smooth, incredibly low and laced with absolute, uncompromising, terrifying authority. She thinks she is dealing with a frustrated hormonal sister and a lenient, overworked county prosecutor who will let her walk away with a pathetic slap on the wrist. She has completely forgotten what I do for a living. He leaned forward deliberately, resting his strong forearms on the hard plastic edge of my hospital bed. Your sister made a catastrophic and unforgivable miscalculation. She is not going to face a bored local judge for a simple family altercation. We are going to bury her under the full and crushing, inescapable weight of the federal justice system. Over the course of the next 4 agonizing days, my sterile hospital room was completely transformed into a secure and highly organized, relentless legal command center. With my doctor's strict, unwavering orders to remain entirely flat on my back to protect my pregnancy, I used my silver laptop propped up carefully on an adjustable medical tray table to systematically and ruthlessly dismantle my sister's entire financial existence. As a senior parish administrator and a highly trained, meticulous professional bookkeeper, tracking hidden money and identifying fraudulent discrepancies was my exact specialized area of expertise. My anger was no longer a frantic, hot, uncontrollable emotion. It had completely crystallized into a razor-sharp, ice-cold surgical precision. I completely stopped crying. I stopped mourning the supportive, loving sister I had always foolishly thought I had. I became an efficient calculating machine, rapidly processing complex numbers, tracing digital addresses, and organizing mountains of undeniable concrete proof. David worked in perfect and silent tandem with me, bringing his heavy, highly encrypted government work laptop and thick stacks of yellow legal pads directly from his home study. We did not speak much during those long hours. We simply worked in a terrifying, synchronized, wordless harmony, born of absolute mutual purpose. I pulled the incredibly detailed multi-page transaction logs from the 3 separate fraudulent credit cards Chloe had brazenly opened using my stolen social security number and my discarded maiden name. I meticulously isolated the exact dates, the precise timestamps, and the specific geographic locations of every single unauthorized, luxurious charge she had made. Look closely at this specific cash advance transaction, I told David, pointing a rigid finger to a bright yellow highlighted line on my complex spreadsheet. She deliberately withdrew $2,000 in untraceable cash from an automated teller machine located inside a casino in downtown Indianapolis. She intentionally crossed the state line to secure the stolen money. David wrote the location information down on his yellow legal pad, his handwriting sharp, precise, and angular. That single action officially upgrades the charge from a standard local identity theft case to a massive, undeniable count of federal wire fraud, he stated clinically, his tone completely devoid of mercy. She utilized a federally insured interstate banking network to illegally transport fraudulently obtained funds across state borders. That specific crime carries a massive, unavoidable, mandatory minimum sentence in a federal facility. But the extensive and devastating financial crimes were only the basic foundation of the inescapable trap we were meticulously building. The absolute crown jewel of our devastating dossier was the crystal-clear, high-definition video footage I had successfully captured on the covert hidden camera disguised as an air purifier inside David's private home office. We sat close together in the quiet, dim hospital room and watched the damning video play out on the bright digital screen. We watched my sister Chloe kneel on the Persian rug and pick the heavy brass lock of the steel filing cabinet with practiced, deliberate, malicious intent. We watched her physically pull out the thick, confidential manila folders clearly stamped with bold red federal court warnings. We watched her carefully and systematically photograph unredacted, highly sensitive witness testimonies and sealed grand jury evidence with her personal cell phone. She was actively planning to sell this highly classified insider information to her sleazy new boyfriend, I said, feeling a fresh, nauseating wave of absolute disgust wash over my entire body. She was perfectly willing to trade the physical safety of vulnerable federal witnesses to a defense attorney just so she could buy more designer shoes and pretend she lived a wealthy, glamorous lifestyle. David stared intensely at the glowing screen, his strong jaw locked so incredibly tight that the muscles in his cheek twitched visibly. She deliberately compromised the sanctity of a federal judicial chamber, he said, his voice dropping a terrifying octave. That is not a simple mistake. That is blatant, undeniable espionage. It is the textbook definition of obstruction of justice. It is the premeditated theft of classified United States government property. These are absolutely not the types of charges you can simply cry your way out of by playing the victim. These are the kinds of severe, unforgiving felonies that put arrogant people in maximum security federal penitentiaries for decades entirely, without the possibility of early parole. We printed every single digital document using a portable secure printer David had brought to the room. We cross-referenced and categorized every single timestamp. We created a massive, heavy, physically undeniable binder of forensic legal evidence. We carefully placed the original fraudulent credit card statements, the traced bank routing numbers, the intercepted home network router logs, and high-resolution glossy color photographs pulled directly from the hidden video footage into thick, clear plastic protective sleeves. We built an airtight, flawless, completely bulletproof federal case right there in the middle of the maternity ward. We were absolutely not just preparing to defend our family. We were preparing to completely, legally, and permanently annihilate her ability to ever manipulate or harm another human being. While we were meticulously gathering our flawless federal trap in the sterile confines of the hospital, my deeply enabling parents were desperately trying to spin their own delusional, manipulative narrative. My cell phone buzzed relentlessly on the bedside table with endless missed calls and long, rambling, gaslighting text messages from my mother, Linda, and my father, Pastor John. They did not bother to ask how my recovery was progressing. They did not ask if their innocent, unborn grandchild had survived the brutal, unprovoked physical attack. They were entirely and selfishly consumed by the desperate, frantic need to protect their beloved golden child and preserve their pristine, hypocritical social reputation within their wealthy church community. On the 5th long day of my hospital stay, my father finally abandoned text messages and left a lengthy, aggressive voice message. I immediately put the phone on speaker mode so David could hear every single toxic word. My father's booming, highly trained, authoritative preaching voice filled the small hospital room thick with manufactured theatrical disappointment and heavy weaponized religious guilt. Sarah, Your mother and I are deeply and profoundly appalled by your incredibly selfish behavior," Pastor John declared, completely and conveniently ignoring the undeniable fact that his youngest daughter had just violently kicked a pregnant woman in the stomach. "You actually had your own flesh and blood sister arrested over a silly, blown out of proportion misunderstanding. You are deliberately tearing this beautiful family apart with your hormonal pregnancy-induced hysteria. We are senior, highly respected leaders in the community church. If this petty domestic dispute gets out to the wider congregation, it will cause a massive, irreversible public scandal. We are officially commanding you to drop these ridiculous vindictive police charges immediately." The toxic voice message continued without skipping a single beat, with my mother chiming in loudly in the background, her voice incredibly shrill, fast, and demanding. "We are hosting a highly private mandatory reconciliation dinner at the parish hall tomorrow evening," she declared with absolute unearned authority. "It will be just the immediate family and a select few of the senior church elders present to mediate the situation. You and David will be there promptly. You will publicly apologize to poor Chloe for overreacting and causing this dramatic scene, and we will put this entire ugly, unfortunate mess behind us exactly like good, forgiving Christians should." The voice message finally clicked off, leaving a heavy, stunned silence in its wake. The sheer, breathtaking, mind-boggling audacity of their delusional demands left me temporarily completely speechless. They actually and genuinely believed they could successfully bully a highly intelligent federal judge and a meticulously prepared, detail-oriented bookkeeper into dropping multiple severe felony charges just to save their fragile social standing at a suburban community church. They arrogantly thought they could ambush me in front of their carefully selected church elders, use intense peer pressure and twisted religious manipulation to force my complete submission, and casually sweep my sister's violent, treasonous federal crimes right under the rug, as if they were nothing more than an innocent mistake. I slowly looked over at David. He was carefully and methodically sliding the very final piece of photographic espionage evidence into the massive, heavy black binder. He closed the thick, rigid cover with a loud, resounding, authoritative snap that echoed sharply and definitively in the quiet, tense hospital room. He looked back at me, a dark, terrifying, highly calculated, incredibly dangerous smile playing slowly at the corners of his mouth. "They actually want to stage a public intervention," I said, feeling a strange, incredibly powerful, icy calm completely wash over my entire body, erasing any lingering fear or hesitation. "They honestly want to drag us into the middle of their parish hall and use the church elders to force me to drop the local domestic assault charges." David smoothly picked up his tailored charcoal suit jacket from the back of the hard plastic hospital chair and gracefully slid his arms into the sleeves, adjusting his cuffs with practiced, deliberate precision. "Let them try," he said smoothly, his voice vibrating with absolute, unshakable confidence. "We will gladly and politely accept their lovely invitation to dinner. We will walk right through the front doors of their parish hall and step directly into their little pathetic trap." He reached down and firmly picked up the heavy, undeniable binder of federal evidence, his dark eyes locking onto mine with an unyielding, fiercely protective, blazing fire. "Because those arrogant fools have absolutely no idea what kind of devastating, inescapable federal trap we are bringing with us." The drive to the community church took exactly 22 minutes, but every single rotation of the tires felt like a suffocating eternity. I sat rigidly in the passenger seat of our SUV, my body locked into a thick, uncomfortable medical brace designed to stabilize my pelvis and protect my high-risk pregnancy. The dull, constant ache radiating through my abdomen was a persistent physical reminder of the brutal kick my sister had delivered just days ago. But the physical pain was absolutely nothing compared to the cold, calculated determination running through my veins. David drove in complete, heavy silence. He wore a dark, perfectly tailored suit, looking every inch the federal judge that he was. His jaw was set like granite, his eyes focused intently on the road ahead. Resting on the back seat, secured carefully inside a thick leather briefcase, was the massive binder of forensic evidence we had spent days compiling in my hospital room. We were walking directly into a trap. My parents, Pastor John and Linda, had called it a private reconciliation dinner, They had framed it as a necessary spiritual intervention to heal our broken family. But David and I knew exactly what it really was. It was an ambush. They intended to use the crushing weight of church authority peer pressure and weaponized religious guilt to force me into dropping the domestic assault charges against their golden child. They thought they could bully the quiet, obedient parish administrator into submission. They had completely forgotten that they were dealing with a mother protecting her unborn child and a federal judge protecting his courtroom. David pulled the car into the empty church parking lot. The sun was just beginning to set, casting long, dark shadows across the asphalt. He stepped out, walked around the vehicle, and carefully helped me out of the passenger seat. He handed me my cane, his touch gentle, but his presence radiating an unstoppable, terrifying strength. He grabbed the heavy leather briefcase from the back, locked the car, and offered me his free arm. We walked slowly toward the side entrance of the parish hall. I took a deep, steadying breath, preparing myself for the psychological warfare that was about to begin. The heavy wooden doors of the parish hall swung open, and the familiar scent of old floor wax and stale coffee instantly filled my nose. The large room had been deliberately arranged for maximum intimidation. A long rectangular folding table sat squarely in the center of the room under the buzzing fluorescent lights. Seated on one side of the table were 4 of the most senior, influential elders of the church congregation. These were men and women I had known my entire life, people who had watched me grow up, people whose complex payroll and charity ledgers I managed every single week. And sitting right in the very center, perfectly flanked by my father and my mother, was Chloe. My sister was putting on the absolute performance of a lifetime. She was wearing a modest, pale blue cardigan that made her look young and fragile. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a simple, unstyled ponytail. She was clutching a crumpled tissue in her hands, her shoulders trembling with quiet, practiced sobs. When we walked into the room, she dramatically dabbed at her dry eyes and shrank back into her chair, acting as if the mere physical sight of me terrified her. My mother, Linda, stood up immediately. Her face was pulled into a tight, severe mask of profound disappointment. "Sarah," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sorrow, "we are so glad you decided to show up. Please sit down. We have a lot of healing to do tonight." David pulled a metal folding chair out for me. I lowered myself into it, slowly wincing slightly as the medical brace pressed uncomfortably against my ribs. David did not sit. He remained standing directly behind my right shoulder, a silent, imposing mountain of authority. He placed the heavy leather briefcase gently onto the floor beside his feet. Pastor John took his position at the head of the table. He clasped his hands together, resting them on top of a worn leather Bible. He looked around the room, making deliberate, heavy eye contact with the church elders, before turning his powerful, resonant preaching voice entirely onto me. "Sarah." My father began, his tone perfectly calibrated to sound both loving and deeply wounded. "We are gathered here tonight in the spirit of absolute forgiveness. The events of the past few days have been a terrible, tragic misunderstanding that has brought deep shame and unnecessary darkness into this family." He paused, letting the heavy silence stretch across the room. He was working the audience, treating the church elders like his own personal jury. "Chloe has confessed to us that you two had a disagreement that escalated out of control. She admits that words were exchanged and that things became inappropriately physical. But she is deeply, profoundly sorry for her part in that sisterly argument." A sisterly argument. The sheer breathtaking audacity of the phrase made the blood pound violently in my ears. She had deliberately kicked a 6-month pregnant woman in the stomach. She had nearly killed my unborn child. And my father was casually waving it away as a simple sibling spat over borrowed clothes. "However," Pastor John continued, his voice rising in volume and authority, "what you did in response, Sarah, is entirely unacceptable for a woman of faith. Calling the local police on your own flesh and blood, having your vulnerable younger sister dragged out of your home in handcuffs and thrown into a county jail cell, that is not how a Christian family operates. That is not grace. That is petty, vindictive revenge." One of the senior elders, a man named Thomas, who had always praised my meticulous bookkeeping, leaned forward. "Sarah, your father is right. We must turn the other cheek. A criminal record will destroy your sister's entire future. You must call the police department first thing tomorrow morning and formally drop the assault charges. We will handle this matter internally with prayer and family counseling." My mother chimed in immediately, her voice sharp and demanding. "You are letting your pregnancy hormones cloud your judgment, Sarah. You are acting completely hysterical. You have your beautiful house, you have your wealthy husband, and your baby is perfectly fine. You need to stop being so incredibly selfish and forgive your sister before you cause a massive, irreversible public scandal for this church." Chloe let out a loud, shuddering sob on cue. "I just want my sister back," she whimpered, burying her face in her hands. "I'm so sorry I made you mad, Sarah. Please don't ruin my life." The entire room stared at me, waiting for me to break. They were waiting for the quiet, compliant, invisible parish administrator to lower her head, apologize for causing a fuss, and surrender her boundaries to protect the golden child. That was the script I had followed for my entire 32 years on this earth. But the woman sitting in that metal folding chair was no longer the compliant daughter they thought they knew. I was a mother protecting her young. I looked at the church elders. I looked at my mother's angry, expectant face. I looked at my father's arrogant, demanding posture. And finally, I looked directly at the fake, manipulative tears streaming down my sister's face. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I felt a wave of absolute, terrifying, ice-cold clarity wash over my entire body. I slowly turned my head and looked up at David. He did not say a word. He simply reached down, picked up the heavy leather briefcase from the floor, and set it squarely on the table in front of me. The brass latches snapped open with a loud, sharp click that echoed in the quiet hall. "You are absolutely right about one thing, Dad," I said, my voice echoing with a low, steady authority that I had never heard come out of my own mouth before. "This family does need to handle the truth. But we are not going to talk about a sisterly argument. We are going to talk about federal wire fraud, identity theft, and corporate espionage." The room went dead silent. The fake sobs instantly stopped echoing from Chloe's side of the table. I reached into the briefcase and pulled out the massive, heavy black binder we had spent days compiling. I lifted it high and dropped it directly onto the center of the wooden folding table. The thick binder hit the surface with a deafening, heavy thud that made the church elders physically jump in their seats. "What on earth is this nonsense, Sarah?" my mother demanded, her voice shrill with sudden uncertainty. "Stop making a scene." I ignored her completely. I flipped the heavy black cover open. I pulled out 4 perfectly organized, thick manila folders and slid one across the table to each of the senior church elders. "Please open them," I commanded, my tone, leaving absolutely no room for negotiation or debate. Elder Thomas hesitated, then slowly opened the folder. The other elders followed suit. I watched their eyes dart across the crisp, printed pages. "Those are official bank statements and credit bureau reports," I explained, smoothly speaking with the cold, clinical precision of an expert bookkeeper delivering a devastating financial audit. 3 weeks ago, Chloe used my stolen Social Security number to open 3 separate platinum credit accounts under my maiden name. She racked up $15,000 in luxury purchases. "That is a complete lie," Chloe shrieked, dropping her tissue, her face turning pale. "She gave me permission to use those cards. She is making this up to ruin me." "Keep turning the pages, Thomas," I said, ignoring my sister's panicked outburst entirely. "Look at the highlighted cash advance transactions. She withdrew thousands of dollars in untraceable cash from ATMs in Detroit and Indianapolis. She intentionally moved fraudulently obtained funds across state borders. That is not a misunderstanding over a borrowed credit card. That is premeditated interstate federal wire fraud." The elders were staring at the documents, the color draining rapidly from their faces. They were businessmen. They understood exactly what those transaction logs meant. My father's face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. "You forged these documents, Sarah," Pastor John roared, slamming his fist onto his Bible. "You printed these out to frame your sister because you are a jealous, bitter woman." "I don't forge documents, Dad. I manage your payroll," I fired back, my voice cutting through his volume like a sharp knife. But financial fraud isn't even the worst part. Turn to the very last section of the folder, gentlemen. Look at the photographs. The room descended into a heavy, suffocating silence as the elders flipped to the glossy, high-definition, full-color photographs printed at the back of the dossier. 2 days before she assaulted me, I continued every word landing like a hammer blow to a nail. I installed a hidden motion-activated security camera inside David's private home office. The photographs you are looking at are time-stamped screenshots taken directly from that video feed. Elder Thomas let out a sharp, audible gasp. His hands began to tremble violently as he held the photograph up to the fluorescent light. The image was undeniable. It showed Chloe kneeling on the Persian rug in our home, holding a professional lock-picking tool, actively breaking into the heavy steel filing cabinet where David kept his sealed federal case files. The next photograph showed her meticulously taking pictures of highly classified, unredacted witness testimonies with her cell phone. My sister has been dating a local defense attorney. I stated, my eyes locking onto my father's horrified face. She broke into a sitting federal judge's locked chambers. She deliberately photographed classified sealed grand jury evidence regarding violent organized crime syndicates with the explicit intention of selling or passing that insider information to a defense lawyer. She did not just steal from me. She committed federal espionage. She committed obstruction of justice. My mother collapsed backward into her folding chair, her hands flying to cover her mouth. She stared at Chloe with wide, terrified eyes. The carefully constructed illusion of the innocent, victimized golden child shattered into a million irreparable pieces right there on the parish hall floor. "This is a federal crime," one of the elders whispered, his voice shaking with absolute terror as he pushed the folder away from him as if the paper itself were contagious. "If the authorities find out this church tried to cover this up—" "Exactly," I said, leaning back into my chair, folding my hands over my medical brace. "You wanted to mediate this internally. You wanted me to drop the local misdemeanor assault charges to protect her reputation. But you cannot pray away a federal felony." The silence that followed was total and absolute. The crushing reality of the situation had finally suffocated the arrogance out of the room. My parents realized in that terrifying instant that they had completely lost control. They could not gaslight forensic banking evidence. They could not guilt-trip a time-stamped photograph of a federal crime. But Chloe, true to her sociopathic, entitled nature, absolutely refused to accept defeat. She suddenly let out a loud, harsh, arrogant laugh. She threw her hands up in the air, completely dropping the fragile victim routine. Her face twisted into a smug, venomous sneer that made her look incredibly ugly. "So what?" Chloe scoffed, leaning back in her chair and crossing her arms defensively. She looked around the table with absolute disdain. "So I took some pictures of boring paperwork. So I maxed out a few stupid credit cards. You think you're so smart with your little binders and your printed photos? It is just white-collar family drama. It is a victimless crime." She turned her dark, hateful eyes toward David, who was still standing silently behind me like a stone sentinel. "The local county cops do not care about some generic credit card dispute between sisters," she taunted him, her voice dripping with toxic arrogance. "And you won't do a single thing about those court files, David. If you report that your secure home office was compromised by your own trashy sister-in-law, the judicial board will investigate you. It will ruin your flawless, precious reputation. You will lose your federal appointment. You are bluffing. You won't risk your own career just to punish me." She smiled a wicked, triumphant smile, genuinely believing she had outsmarted a federal judge. She honestly believed that our desire to protect David's reputation would be the perfect shield for her crimes. David did not react to her taunts with anger. He did not raise his voice. He simply reached into the inner pocket of his tailored charcoal suit jacket, pulled out his expensive silver pocket watch, and calmly checked the time. He snapped the watch closed. He looked down at Chloe, and a slow, terrifying, utterly merciless smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a predator that had just locked the cage door. "I don't need local cops, Chloe," David said quietly. The heavy wooden double doors at the back of the parish hall did not just open. They were breached with a sudden coordinated force that made the solid walls of the building physically shudder. The loud, sudden noise echoed like a gunshot through the suffocating silence of the room. Every single head around the folding table snapped toward the entrance in pure shock. Chloe let out a sharp gasp, dropping her smug, triumphant smile instantly. My parents twisted in their metal chairs, their faces pale with sudden confusion. The senior church elders froze, completely paralyzed by the sudden disruption of their private, secretive intervention. Stepping through the threshold was not a pair of local county police officers responding to a minor domestic dispute. It was a highly coordinated team of 6 heavily armed, imposing men and women wearing tactical vests. The bold, bright yellow letters printed across their dark navy windbreakers spelled out FBI. Walking closely beside them were 2 massive, imposing figures bearing the unmistakable silver stars of the United States Marshal Service. The atmosphere inside the quiet church hall evaporated in a single terrifying instant. The manufactured religious guilt and the heavy patriarchal authority that my father had wielded for decades were instantly completely obliterated. They were entirely replaced by the crushing, undeniable weight of the United States federal government. These agents did not care about church politics. They did not care about my father and his pastoral reputation. They moved with a cold, calculated, absolute military precision that signaled an inescapable doom. They marched straight down the center aisle of the parish hall, the heavy, rhythmic thud of their tactical boots vibrating against the polished, hardwood floor. The sheer physical presence of the federal agents was terrifyingly overwhelming. They surrounded our folding table in a flawless tactical formation, completely cutting off any possible avenue of escape. The lead FBI agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man with sharp, unyielding eyes, stepped directly forward. He completely ignored my mother, who was clutching her chest in horror. He completely ignored my father, who was standing up with his mouth hanging open in sheer disbelief. The agent locked his piercing gaze entirely onto my younger sister, Chloe. Elizabeth Adams, the agent spoke, his voice a deep, booming baritone that left absolutely no room for negotiation or argument. We have a federal warrant for your immediate arrest. The color completely, violently drained from my sister's face, leaving her looking like a hollow white ghost. The carefully constructed illusion of her absolute invincibility popped like a fragile soap bubble. She looked wildly, frantically around the room, her eyes darting like a trapped, panicked animal. She looked at the church elders, who were actively shrinking back in their chairs, trying to put as much physical distance between themselves and a federal suspect as possible. She looked at my mother, who was completely frozen in a state of absolute mute terror. "What are you talking about?" Chloe stammered, her voice cracking into a high-pitched, terrified squeak. "This is a mistake. I did not do anything wrong. You have the wrong person. I'm just having a family dispute with my sister." The lead agent did not blink. He did not show a single ounce of pity or hesitation. He reached to his tactical belt and produced a heavy pair of cold steel handcuffs. The metallic clinking sound they made as he prepared them seemed to echo endlessly in the quiet parish hall. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," the agent commanded, stepping firmly toward her. "No," Chloe shrieked. Scrambling backward so fast, her metal folding chair tipped over and crashed loudly onto the floor. "Daddy, tell them to stop. Tell them they are making a mistake. Make them stop right now." She reverted instantly into a helpless, spoiled toddler, begging her parents to magically fix her problems, just like they had done for her entire miserable, entitled life. But my father could not save her from this. Pastor John was used to controlling his obedient congregation with booming sermons and heavy guilt trips, but his localized suburban authority was absolutely useless against federal law enforcement. Still, my father desperately tried to intervene. He puffed out his chest, using his deepest, most authoritative preaching voice, attempting to command the situation. "Now see here, gentlemen," my father demanded, stepping squarely into the path of the approaching federal agents. "I am the head pastor of this community parish. This is a private family matter that we are currently handling internally through the church. You have absolutely no jurisdiction to barge into my sanctuary and harass my daughter over a simple sibling misunderstanding." The federal marshal standing closest to my father did not even raise his voice. He simply placed a firm, heavy hand squarely onto my father's chest and easily pushed him backward with terrifying, effortless strength. Sir, the marshal stated, his tone completely devoid of any warmth or respect. Step back immediately or you will be placed under federal arrest for actively interfering with an ongoing federal investigation and the obstruction of justice. Do not make me repeat myself. My father stumbled backward, his arrogant bluster completely shattering into dust. For the very first time in his entire privileged, comfortable life, Pastor John was rendered completely powerless. He stood there trembling, watching helplessly as the lead FBI agent firmly grabbed Chloe by her shoulders and spun her forcefully around. The cinematic, deeply satisfying sound of the heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting tightly around her delicate wrists echoed through the hall. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of absolute, undeniable accountability. Chloe. Elizabeth Adams, the agent recited, his voice ringing out with legal finality. You are under arrest for multiple counts of interstate wire fraud, identity theft, and the unauthorized access of a secured federal judicial server. You have the right to remain silent. Every single word of the Miranda rights fell upon the room like a heavy, crushing sledgehammer. I sat in my wheelchair, my medical brace pressing tightly against my back, and felt an overwhelming, profound wave of peace wash over my entire body. I watched my sister, the golden child who had tormented me, manipulated me, and violently assaulted my pregnant body, finally face the brutal, unyielding reality of her own actions. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The agent continued, seamlessly marching her toward the exit. Chloe was sobbing hysterically now, her legs giving out so the agents had to physically support her weight to keep her moving. She was thrashing wildly, her salon-styled blonde hair falling in a messy, tangled wreck across her tear-stained face. "Mom!" She screamed, her voice tearing through her throat in absolute sheer panic. "Mom, do something. David, make them stop. Please, David, I am sorry." My mother Linda burst into loud, agonizing wails. She tried to run toward her precious golden child, but another agent stepped firmly into her path, holding his hand up like a solid brick wall. "You cannot take her," my mother shrieked, tears streaming rapidly down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "She is just a young girl. She did not know what she was doing. She made a mistake. Please, you are ruining her entire life." My father, realizing that his religious authority was entirely useless, turned his desperate, frantic attention toward the only person in the room who held actual secular power. He turned toward my husband. "David," my father yelled, his face red and sweating with pure panic. "David, you are a federal judge. You know these people. You have the power to stop this madness right now. Call them off, David. She is your sister-in-law. You are destroying our family over a few stupid credit cards. Tell them to unhand her this instant." David had been standing perfectly still behind my wheelchair this entire time, watching the arrest unfold with the cold, detached, clinical observation of a seasoned legal professional. When my father demanded his intervention, David slowly, casually unbuttoned his tailored charcoal suit jacket. He took a single deliberate step forward, placing himself directly between my father and my wheelchair, forming a solid, impenetrable human shield. David did not yell. He did not lose his temper. He simply looked at my father with a gaze so terrifyingly cold and utterly devoid of mercy that the temperature in the parish hall seemed to plummet. He turned to his in-laws, delivering a chillingly polite, heavily calculated lecture that dismantled their entire false reality piece by piece. "I cannot call them off," John David stated, his voice smooth and lethally calm. "And even if I possessed the legal authority to interfere with a federal warrant, I absolutely would not do it. Your daughter did not just steal a few credit cards. She orchestrated a calculated, premeditated campaign of massive financial fraud. She intentionally used stolen identification to secure illicit funds, and then she deliberately crossed state borders to withdraw that stolen cash. That action alone elevates her petty theft into major interstate wire fraud. My mother let out a loud, tragic gasp, covering her mouth with both of her trembling hands. But her financial crimes are the absolute least of her problems right now. David continued, his dark eyes locking onto my father's horrified face. Your precious, innocent daughter used specialized tools to pick the heavy lock on a secured federal filing cabinet located inside my private chambers. She used her cellular device to photograph highly classified, sealed grand jury testimonies regarding extremely violent, organized crime syndicates. She committed those acts with the explicit intention of selling that insider information to a local defense attorney. The senior church elders sitting at the folding table collectively gasped. Elder Thomas physically pushed his chair backward, scraping loudly against the floor as if he needed to get as far away from my parents as possible. The elders realized with sudden sickening clarity that they had almost been manipulated into helping cover up a massive, catastrophic federal conspiracy. That is the textbook legal definition of federal espionage, David explained, speaking slowly and methodically so every single syllable could be perfectly understood. That is the blatant obstruction of a federal investigation. It is the theft of classified United States government property. These are not minor local misdemeanors, John. These are severe, catastrophic federal felonies that threaten the absolute core of the national justice system. But she is family. My father pleaded, his voice completely breaking his powerful pastor persona, reduced to a pathetic, begging whimper. She is just a lost girl. Please, David, have some mercy. She will learn her lesson. She will pay the money back. Just give her a chance to apologize. Mercy is for the courtroom, David replied, his voice completely hollow and unyielding. And unfortunately for Chloe, the federal justice system relies on extremely rigid parameters. I think you fail to comprehend the sheer magnitude of the situation she has proudly placed herself in. David casually checked the expensive silver pocket watch, resting in his hand, the metallic click sounding exceptionally loud in the terrified silence of the room. He looked back up at my broken, weeping parents, delivering the final devastating blow with the absolute precision of a master surgeon. Under the current federal sentencing guidelines, David lectured, his tone polite, educational, and entirely merciless. The mandatory minimum sentence for interstate wire fraud, coupled with identity theft, is severe. When you add the undeniable charges of attempting to compromise a sitting federal judge chambers and federal espionage, you are no longer looking at a simple slap on the wrist. She is looking at a mandatory minimum of 10 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. My mother collapsed, completely falling to her knees on the hard wooden floor, sobbing so violently she could barely draw breath into her lungs. And because she has demonstrated a clear willingness to compromise sensitive federal witnesses and poses an extreme flight risk, David concluded, smoothly dropping the watch back into his tailored pocket, there will be absolutely no bail granted for what she did. She will not be coming home tonight. She will not be coming home tomorrow. She will sit in a secure federal holding facility until her trial begins, and then she will be transferred directly to a federal prison. My father stood completely frozen, staring at David with wide, vacant eyes. His entire perfectly curated, wealthy suburban existence had just been completely, permanently annihilated. The golden child he had protected and enabled for her entire life was gone. The pristine social reputation he had built his entire church career upon was instantly completely destroyed. There would be absolutely no recovering from a scandal of this massive public magnitude. At the back of the hall, the heavy wooden double doors swung wide open once again. The lead FBI agent and the federal marshals marched Chloe out of the building. Her frantic, desperate screams echoed down the long, empty corridor of the church, slowly fading into the distance as they dragged her outside toward the waiting armored federal transport vehicles. David turned away from my weeping parents, completely dismissing their existence. He reached down, placing his strong, warm hands gently onto the handles of my wheelchair. He looked down at me, his dark eyes immediately softening into a deeply protective, loving warmth that was reserved entirely for me and our unborn child. "Are you ready to go home, Sarah?" he asked quietly. I looked at the heavy binder of forensic evidence resting on the table. I looked at the church elders, who were sitting in stunned, absolute silence. I looked at my parents, broken and weeping on the floor of the parish hall, completely powerless to stop the consequences of their own toxic enabling. I placed my hand gently over my pregnant stomach, feeling my baby girl kick strongly and safely inside me. The silent toxic invasion that had threatened to destroy my sanctuary was completely finally over. The parasite had been surgically permanently removed. "Yes," I said, feeling a profound, beautiful smile spread across my face. "Take me home, David." David turned my wheelchair smoothly around and guided me gently toward the exit. We rolled past the weeping forms of my parents, past the terrified church elders, and straight out through the heavy wooden double doors. We left them completely alone in the cold, empty parish hall to face the absolute brutal ruin of the false reality they had spent their entire lives building. The soft golden light of the late afternoon sun filters gently through the white plantation shutters of our newly finished nursery, casting warm, bright stripes across the pristine hardwood floor. I'm sitting in a plush upholstered rocking chair, moving back and forth in a slow, comforting rhythm. In my arms rests the most profound, beautiful miracle I have ever known. My healthy, perfectly safe baby girl is sleeping soundly against my chest. Her tiny hands are curled into delicate little fists, and her chest rises and falls with a steady, peaceful breathing that I could listen to for the rest of my life. I trace the incredibly soft curve of her cheek with my index finger, completely overwhelmed by a fierce, protective maternal love that brings happy tears to my eyes. 6 months have passed since the terrifying, violent nightmare that nearly took her away from me. 6 months since the heavy wooden double doors of the community parish hall swung open and a team of federal agents marched in to surgically remove the toxic parasite that had invaded my sanctuary. The agonizing physical pain in my abdomen has completely healed. The suffocating psychological dread that used to govern my every waking moment has entirely evaporated. The absolute terrifying noise of my past is finally permanently gone. The door to the nursery opens with a quiet, gentle click. My husband David steps silently into the room. He has traded his heavy, intimidating charcoal federal courtroom suits for a soft, comfortable gray cashmere sweater and faded denim jeans. He walks over to the rocking chair and kneels down beside us, resting his large, warm hand softly over our daughter's tiny back. He looks up at me, and his dark, highly observant eyes are filled with an endless well of absolute, unyielding devotion. He is no longer the cold, terrifyingly calculating legal strategist who methodically destroyed my sister's entire existence. In this bright, peaceful room, he is simply a fiercely protective, loving father and a deeply devoted husband. We share a quiet, knowing smile that communicates absolutely everything we need to say without speaking a single word. We survived the storm. We protected our family. We won. The justice we secured was not just a temporary emotional victory. It was a massive, permanent legal annihilation. When the federal agents dragged my sister Chloe out of that church hall in heavy steel handcuffs, she genuinely, arrogantly believed she could simply talk her way out of the situation. She had spent her entire 28 years manipulating our enabling parents, crying fake theatrical tears and playing the helpless, misunderstood victim to escape every single consequence of her selfish actions. She honestly thought the federal justice system would be just as easily manipulated. She thought she could sit in a sterile federal interrogation room, bat her tear-filled eyes, and convince highly trained, seasoned FBI agents that I had somehow completely fabricated the massive, undeniable mountain of forensic financial evidence against her. She was devastatingly, tragically incorrect. The federal prosecutors did not care about her manufactured family drama. They did not care about her carefully curated victim narrative. They cared exclusively about the time-stamped high-definition video footage of her actively committing espionage inside a secured judicial chamber. They cared about the extensive, heavily documented interstate banking records, proving she committed massive wire fraud across state borders. Her sleazy local defense attorney boyfriend, the man she had desperately tried to impress by stealing highly classified government documents, completely abandoned her the exact second he realized she was the target of an active federal investigation. He stopped answering her frantic phone calls from the county holding cell and completely vanished to protect his own legal license, leaving her entirely alone to face the crushing, inescapable weight of the United States government. When Chloe overworked court-appointed public defender finally sat her down and bluntly explained the terrifying reality of the federal sentencing guidelines, her fragile, arrogant ego completely shattered. The prosecutor offered her a stark, unforgiving choice. She could take the case to trial, where the overwhelming forensic evidence guaranteed a conviction and a mandatory minimum sentence of 20 years in a maximum security facility, or she could accept a plea agreement. For the very first time in her completely sheltered, entitled life, my sister realized that nobody was coming to rescue her. Our parents could not buy her way out. Her tears had absolutely no currency. She took the plea deal. She stood in a federal courtroom wearing a standard-issue orange jumpsuit completely stripped of her expensive designer clothes and her salon-styled highlights, and she openly wept as she officially pleaded guilty to multiple federal felonies. Today, my sister is currently serving a lengthy multi-year sentence in a federal penitentiary hundreds of miles away from our quiet suburban life. She sleeps on a thin mattress in a tiny concrete cell. She eats heavily regulated scheduled meals. She works a mandatory menial job for pennies an hour. She has absolutely zero access to luxury boutiques, expensive vacations, or stolen credit cards. She is no longer the golden child. She is no longer the center of the universe. She is simply another federal inmate number trapped in a cold mechanical system that absolutely does not care about her complaints or her demands. The catastrophic fallout for my deeply enabling parents was equally devastating and incredibly swift. Pastor John and Linda had spent decades meticulously building a flawless, pristine social reputation within our wealthy suburban community. They had used their highly elevated position at the community church to manipulate, control, and judge everyone around them, weaponizing their religious authority to protect their beloved golden child. But you cannot simply sweep a highly publicized federal espionage and wire fraud indictment under the parish rug. The local news media quickly got hold of the sensational story. The headlines detailing how a prominent local pastor daughter was arrested by the FBI for committing federal crimes against a sitting United States judge were utterly devastating to their carefully curated public image. The very same senior church elders who had sat at that folding table and arrogantly tried to bully me into dropping the domestic assault charges suddenly realized the massive catastrophic liability my father represented to their organization. They convened a highly secretive emergency parish board meeting behind closed doors. They did not offer my father the unconditional grace and forgiveness he had so hypocritically demanded from me. They offered him a brutal, uncompromising ultimatum. He could either resign his position immediately citing personal family health reasons, or he would be publicly, unceremoniously fired and formally stripped of his pastoral credentials. My father was forced to step down in absolute, complete disgrace. He lost his powerful pulpit, his massive, comfortable salary, and his unquestionable community authority in one single afternoon. My mother, Linda, suffered a complete, total social collapse. She lost her prestigious standing in the community, her influential prayer circles, and her wealthy country club friends. The affluent congregation completely rapidly turned their backs on them, treating them like absolute social pariahs. The magnificent false reality they had spent their entire adult lives building was completely permanently reduced to ashes. When their comfortable world violently collapsed, they predictably desperately tried to crawl back to the daughter they had always used as their emotional dumping ground. My cell phone was suddenly flooded with long, rambling voicemails from my mother, sobbing hysterically, begging for emergency financial assistance, and demanding her absolute right to see her new, beautiful granddaughter. My father sent numerous lengthy emails heavily quoting scripture and aggressively demanding family loyalty and traditional Christian forgiveness. I did not listen to a single voicemail. I did not read a single email. I did not shed a single solitary tear for their entirely self-inflicted misery. I hired an independent, ruthless family attorney to draft and deliver a highly aggressive formal cease and desist order to their front door. I explicitly legally warned them that any further attempt to contact me my husband or my child would immediately result in severe restraining orders and further legal action. I legally, financially, and completely emotionally severed every single tie to them. We upgraded our comprehensive home security system. I changed my personal phone number and my private email address. I completely erased them from my universe. They are completely dead to me, and I have never felt more incredibly profoundly alive. Sitting here in this beautiful, bright, peaceful nursery, I look back at the frightened, exhausted woman I used to be. For 32 long years, I was the compliant, quiet, invisible daughter. I silently swallowed my pride. I gratefully accepted their pathetic, tiny breadcrumbs of affection. I allowed them to actively weaponize my own faith and my deep desire for family harmony against me. I truly foolishly believed that being a good, loyal person meant sacrificing my own mental, emotional, and physical safety to keep my toxic family comfortable. I thought that maintaining family loyalty was a sacred, unbreakable obligation no matter how much pain it caused me. But that terrifying, unforgettable night in my kitchen when my own flesh and blood sister violently kicked my pregnant stomach and my parents shamelessly tried to gaslight me into absolute silence, the illusion finally completely shattered. I realized with crystal clear, ice-cold certainty that true love does not ever require you to become a human shield. True love does not demand that you blindly accept violent abuse and politely call it forgiveness. True family does not force you to be a permanent punching bag for someone else's fragile, entitled ego. I finally learned that the absolute most powerful thing you can ever do is simply stop participating in your own destruction. I stopped trying to earn love from people who were completely incapable of giving it, and I started fiercely, passionately protecting the beautiful family I had actually chosen. If you are watching this and you have been told your entire life to simply keep the peace while someone violently tears your life apart, I want you to remember this extremely important lesson. Boundaries are absolutely not a betrayal of your family. They are the necessary, vital protection of your own peace. You do not ever have to set yourself on fire just to keep toxic, manipulative people warm. You have the absolute fundamental right to walk away from anyone who treats you like an acceptable sacrifice. You deserve to live a life completely free from fear, manipulation, and constant heavy guilt. Have you ever had to cut off a deeply toxic family member who constantly used the concept of forgiveness as a weapon to avoid accountability for their actions? I want you to tell me your story in the comments below. Let us build a community of people who refuse to be silent victims anymore. And if this story brought you a profound, deeply satisfying sense of justice, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing these empowering journeys together. Do not forget to let me know in the comments what state or city you are watching from and what time it is there right now. I absolutely love reading your comments and connecting with every single one of you. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next story.